The fluorescent lights hummed their monotonous song through the corridors of Westbridge Academy, casting pale shadows across marble floors that gleamed like mirrors. It was 6:47 a.m., and the building still held its breath before the chaos of teenage voices would flood its halls. Sarah Mitchell pushed her cleaning cart past the trophy cases, her reflection fragmented in the polished glass. 28 years old, with auburn hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and green eyes that seemed to hold more stories than they told, she moved with the quiet efficiency of someone who had learned to make themselves small in large spaces. The cart's wheels squeaked, the front left one, always stubborn, and Sarah made a mental note to oil it during lunch. Small sounds mattered in empty hallways. They announced your presence before you arrived, gave people time to look away, to pretend they didn't see you. She had been cleaning at Westbridge for 3 months now, 3 months of invisible mornings and ghost-quiet afternoons, 3 months since everything fell apart. The chemistry lab needed attention. Some experiment had apparently exploded yesterday, leaving green residue across 2 workstations. Sarah propped the door open with her cart and began the methodical work of restoration. Spray, wipe, rinse. There was something meditative about cleaning, something honest. Dirt didn't lie. Grime didn't pretend to be something it wasn't. Her hands moved in practice circles across the black countertop. These same hands had once held surgical instruments, had stitched wounds closed, had steadied themselves through 12-hour shifts at Metropolitan General. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, third-year resident, youngest in her program, destined for greatness according to everyone who'd ever written her a recommendation letter. That was before Dr. Philip Harrison decided her rejection was an insult worth destroying her career over. The memory arrived uninvited, Philip's hand on her lower back at the hospital gala, his whisper against her ear, the confidence in his touch that assumed her body was territory he had a right to explore. Her polite refusal, then his promise, delivered with a smile that never reached his eyes, "You'll regret this." He'd kept that promise. False accusations of medical negligence, fabricated reports, a conspiracy so carefully constructed that by the time Sarah understood what was happening, her reputation was already burning. The hospital board had offered her a quiet resignation instead of a public investigation. Take the mercy, they said, disappear gracefully. So she had disappeared. Not gracefully. There was nothing graceful about selling your furniture to make rent, about deleting LinkedIn because seeing your former colleague's success felt like swallowing glass. But she had disappeared. Sarah finished the chemistry lab and moved to the faculty lounge. Coffee rings stained the wooden table. Someone had left half a bagel on a napkin, abandoned mid-bite. She cleaned it all away, erasing the small debris of other people's lives. The door opened behind her. "Oh," a woman's voice, surprised. "I didn't realize anyone was here yet." Sarah turned. Ms. Rebecca Hayes stood in the doorway, English department, approximately 45 years old, with silver-threaded hair and the kind of face that probably looked exactly the same when she smiled as when she didn't. She held a stack of essays that looked heavy enough to qualify as a weapon. "Just finishing up," Sarah said, already moving toward her cart. "Please don't rush on my account." Rebecca set the essays down and poured herself coffee from the pot that was probably cold by now. She didn't seem to care. "You're new, aren't you? I don't think we've formally met." "Sarah, I started in September." "Rebecca, though the students call me Ms. Hayes in that tone that makes it sound like I'm ancient." She smiled, and it reached her eyes. "You do excellent work. This place hasn't looked this clean in years." Something uncomfortable shifted in Sarah's chest. Compliments felt like landmines lately. "Thank you." "I mean it." Rebecca took a sip of cold coffee and grimaced. "The previous janitorial staff was adequate at best, but you're thorough, detail-oriented. It's appreciated." Sarah nodded, uncertain how to respond. The silence stretched like taffy. Then footsteps echoed in the hallway, sharp, rapid, the kind of walking that announced importance and impatience in equal measure. A man appeared in the doorway, mid-40s, expensively dressed in the way that looked effortless but cost more than Sarah's monthly salary. His silver watch caught the light as he gestured with his coffee cup. "Rebecca, have you seen the—" He stopped, noticing Sarah. His expression shifted the way people's expressions always shifted when they registered her existence. Polite dismissal, the look reserved for furniture and service staff. "Richard," Rebecca's voice cooled several degrees. "Sarah was just clean." "She'll be done shortly." "Richard Thornton." Sarah knew him by reputation, vice principal old money, the kind of man who wore his prep school pedigree like armor. He'd never spoken to her directly, but she'd heard him speak to others. Volume and certainty were his primary modes of communication. Right, Richard's eyes skated past Sarah like she was transparent. Rebecca, the board meeting agenda. Davidson wants to add the budget discussion, but I think we should table it until. Excuse me. Another voice, this one unfamiliar, coming from behind Richard. Sarah looked up and felt the world tilt slightly. The man standing in the hallway was perhaps 35, with dark hair that fell across his forehead in a way that suggested he'd forgotten to get it cut weeks ago. He wore simple clothes, jeans, a dark sweater, work boots, but carried himself with the kind of quiet confidence that didn't need expensive fabric to announce its presence. His eyes, storm gray and unusually direct, found Sarah's. "I'm looking for Ms. Mitchell," he said. The fluorescent lights hummed. Sarah's heart performed an acrobatic routine against her ribs. "I'm Sarah Mitchell," she managed. Richard turned to look at her properly for the first time, his expression puzzled, as if surprised she had a full name. The man in the doorway smiled. It was a subtle thing, barely a curve at the corner of his mouth, but it changed his entire face. "I'm James Westbrook. Could I speak with you for a moment?" Rebecca and Richard exchanged glances, the universal faculty language for "who is this person?" Sarah's throat felt dry. "I'm working, I shouldn't." "It'll only take a minute." Something in James's voice suggested this wasn't really a request, despite the polite phrasing, "please." She abandoned her cart and followed him into the hallway, hyper-aware of Richard and Rebecca watching through the lounge window. James walked several paces ahead, then stopped near the trophy cases, far enough from the lounge for privacy. "I'm sorry to interrupt your morning," he said. "I realize this is unusual." "What's this about?" Sarah kept her voice steady despite the anxiety crawling up her spine. Was this about Dr. Harrison? Had he found her somehow? Was he still destroying what little remained of her life? "I wanted to introduce myself properly. I've been, let's say, observing." James's gray eyes studied her with an intensity that felt simultaneously invasive and strangely respectful. "You're overqualified for this position, Ms. Mitchell, significantly overqualified." Sarah's blood ran cold. "I don't know what you." Medical degree from Johns Hopkins, residency at Metropolitan General, spotless record until 8 months ago. James's voice remained neutral, factual, not accusatory, but not ignorant either. "Then suddenly you're cleaning classrooms at a private academy in Connecticut." Her hands curled into fists at her sides. "How do you know that?" "I make it my business to know who works in this building." He paused. "And why?" "Then you also know I wasn't fired for incompetence." The words came out sharper than intended. "You know I was destroyed by someone with more power and fewer morals." "I know Dr. Philip Harrison is currently under investigation by the medical board for multiple accusations of harassment and abuse of power." James's expression didn't change, but something flickered behind his eyes. "The investigation went public last week. 3 women have come forward. A 4th is submitting testimony this week." Sarah's knees felt suddenly unreliable. "What?" "Your name hasn't been mentioned in any reports. Your resignation is still on record as voluntary." He tilted his head slightly. "But the timeline suggests you were patient 0. You said no to the wrong man, and he made you disappear." The trophy cases reflected her face back at her, pale, shocked, barely breathing. "Why are you telling me this?" she whispered. James was quiet for a moment. The morning light streaming through the tall windows made him look almost ethereal, like a figure from a Renaissance painting dropped into fluorescent reality. "Because I believe people deserve to know when the tide is turning," he said finally. "And because I wanted you to know that what you're doing here, this work, this quiet dignity in the face of injustice, it hasn't gone unnoticed." Before Sarah could respond, footsteps thundered down the hallway. A student, couldn't be more than 16, wearing the Westbridge uniform with deliberate carelessness, skidded around the corner and nearly collided with James. "Watch it," the boy snapped. James stepped aside without comment. The boy's eyes landed on Sarah's cleaning cart, still visible through the faculty lounge window. His lip curled. "Great, the janitor's blocking the hallway again. Some of us have class." "The hallway is 12 feet wide," James observed mildly. "There's plenty of room." The boy looked at James properly for the first time, taking in tea. He casual clothes and work boots, his sneer deepened. Who the hell are you? Maintenance. Tell your girlfriend to move her cart. Sarah's face burned. She started to move toward the cart, but James's hand, warm, steady, touched her elbow briefly, a gesture that said stay. I'm not maintenance, James said, his voice still conversational but somehow colder. And Ms. Mitchell doesn't answer to you. Dude, I don't have time for this. The boy tried to push past, but James shifted his position slightly, creating a human wall without appearing aggressive. Then I'll be brief, James said. You're going to apologize to Ms. Mitchell. The boy laughed, actually laughed. For what? Telling a janitor to move her SH. For treating another human being as if her profession determines her worth. James's eyes had gone from storm gray to something darker, something glacial. For assuming that because someone cleans floors, they deserve less respect than someone who walks on them. This is insane. The boy looked around as if searching for backup. The hallway remained empty except for the three of them and the unforgiving morning light. I'm going to report you to. To whom? James asked. Please, I'm curious. The boy's bravado flickered. Something in James's complete calm seemed to unsettle him more than shouting would have. Richard Thornton emerged from the faculty lounge, drawn by the commotion. What's going on here? Nothing, the boy said quickly. Just some random guy harassing me for treating the janitorial staff with contempt, James interrupted smoothly. I was suggesting he apologize. Richard's expression cycled through confusion, irritation, and then a practiced smile that looked adhesive. I appreciate the concern, Mr. Westbrook. Mr. Westbrook, but perhaps it's best if we let the school administration handle student discipline. Richard's tone managed to be both condescending and dismissive simultaneously. I'm sure you understand. Of course, James's voice remained pleasant. And you're Richard Thornton, vice principal. Your office is down the hall, third door on the right, with the mahogany desk you imported from Scotland 2 years ago. Richard's practiced smile faltered. How do you? I know quite a bit about this school. James turned back to the student, who was now looking increasingly uncomfortable. Final opportunity. Apologize to Ms. Mitchell. The boy glanced at Richard, seeking permission or rescue. Richard's face had gone carefully blank. I'm sorry, the boy muttered, the words dragged out like splinters, for being disrespectful. Sincerely, James prompted. The boy's jaw clenched, but something in James's unwavering stare must have convinced him this wasn't a battle worth fighting. I'm sorry, ma'am, I was rude. It won't happen again. Sarah found her voice. Apology accepted. The boy fled down the hallway as if released from a trap. Richard remained, his expression unreadable, studying James with new wariness. Who are you? Richard asked, the administrative politeness stripped away. James smiled. It was the kind of smile that held secrets. Someone who cares about how people are treated in this building. Have a good morning, Mr. Thornton, Ms. Mitchell. He walked away then, his footsteps echoing through the corridor, leaving Sarah and Richard standing in stunned silence. Rebecca appeared at Richard's elbow, her essay stack forgotten. Did that just happen? Who the hell was that? Richard's voice carried an edge Sarah had never heard before, something close to uncertainty. Sarah returned to her cart, her hands trembling slightly as she gripped the handle. The wheel squeaked as she pushed forward, the front left one, still stubborn, still announcing her presence in empty spaces. But for the first time in 8 months, Sarah didn't feel invisible. She felt seen, and that was terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. The rest of the morning passed in a blur of routine tasks made strange by hyper-awareness. Sarah couldn't shake the conversation from her mind, James's words circling like birds refusing to land. The investigation went public. 3 women have come forward. She cleaned the second-floor bathrooms with mechanical efficiency, her thoughts elsewhere. Could it be true? After 8 months of carrying her ruined career like stones in her pockets, could the weight finally be shifting? By 10:30 a.m., students flooded the hallways, their voices creating a wall of sound that made thinking impossible. Sarah pushed her cart toward the library, seeking refuge in the quieter wing of the building. But as she rounded the corner, raised voices stopped her. I said move the cart. The voice belonged to Ethan Morrison, senior class president, son of a state senator, wearing his privilege like cologne, too much of it. The voice that answered was soft, almost apologetic. "I'm cleaning the spill, sir. Just one more minute." Carlos Mendez, 63 years old, night janitor, a man who smiled at everyone despite having buried a wife 2 years ago and working 2 jobs to keep his daughter in nursing school. Sarah had shared coffee with him once during a shift overlap. He'd shown her pictures of his daughter, Maria, pride shining in his eyes like sunlight through glass. Sarah abandoned her cart and walked quickly toward the sound. She found them near the water fountain, Carlos kneeling beside his bucket, wiping up what looked like spilled juice, while Ethan stood over him with theatrical impatience. 3 other students flanked Ethan, performing for each other, their laughter sharp. A minute, Ethan checked his phone with exaggerated concern. "I have class, move now." Almost finished, Carlos's voice shook slightly. "God, why are janitors so useless?" This from a girl in pearls that probably cost more than Carlos's monthly rent. "Just leave it, let him walk through it." The group laughed. Carlos's shoulders curved inward, his body languid, shrinking. Something hot and bright ignited in Sarah's chest. She'd spent 8 months making herself small, swallowing humiliation, accepting that this was her new reality. But watching Carlos, kind, gentle Carlos, be treated like an obstacle instead of a human being. "Excuse me," Sarah said, her voice cutting through the laughter. 5 faces turned toward her. Ethan's expression cycled through confusion to recognition to dismissal in under 2 seconds. "Another janitor," he said, like it was a punchline. "Perfect. Can one of you handle this faster? Some of us have academic responsibilities." Sarah moved to stand beside Carlos, close enough that her presence said together, "Mr. Mendez is doing his job, which is more than I can say for students blocking the hallway." The Pearls girl's mouth opened in theatrical shock. "Excuse me." "The hallway is 15 feet wide." Sarah kept her voice level, channeling every ounce of authority she'd once used in emergency rooms when convincing patients to let her save their lives. "Walk around. It takes 3 seconds and zero rudeness." Ethan's face flushed. "Do you know who I am?" "A student who's going to be late to class if he keeps having this conversation," Sarah replied. "Mr. Mendez will finish cleaning, you'll walk 10 feet to the left, everyone moves on with their day. Simple solution." "I could report you," Ethan said, but his voice carried less certainty than his words suggested. "For insubordination, for..." "For what?" A new voice entered the scene. "For asking you to walk around a wet floor." James appeared from the library doors, a book tucked under one arm, his expression curious rather than confrontational. He looked at Ethan with the kind of mild interest someone might give a museum exhibit. Ethan's flush deepened. "Not you again. Look, I don't know what kind of authority you think you have, but..." "I have the authority of basic human decency," James interrupted gently, "which, unfortunately, appears to be in short supply this morning." He glanced at Sarah and Carlos. "Is everything all right?" "Fine," Sarah said. "We're just cleaning. These students were just leaving." Ethan looked like he wanted to argue, but something in James's calm gaze, that same unsettling steadiness from earlier, seemed to drain his momentum. "Whatever, this school is going to hell anyway. Janitors think they can talk back, random people wander the halls." He turned to his followers. "Come on, we'll take the east stairs." The group departed with theatrical annoyance, their voices carrying down the hallway long after they disappeared. Carlos stood slowly, his knees making soft popping sounds. "You didn't have to do that, Sarah. I'm used to." "You shouldn't have to be used to it," Sarah said firmly. She picked up his bucket. "Come on, let's finish this together." James watched them work for a moment, then knelt beside them without a word. He took the spray bottle from Carlos's car, RT, and began cleaning the baseboard where juice had splattered. "Sir, you don't need to," Carlos started. "I know," James said simply, "but it'll go faster with 3 people." They worked in silence, Sarah, Carlos, and this strange man who defended janitors and cleaned floors in expensive jeans. When the area was spotless, Carlos straightened and looked at James with open confusion. "Thank you," Carlos said, "but who are you exactly? I haven't seen you on staff." "Just someone who appreciates good work," James replied. He returned the spray bottle to Carlos's cart with care. "Your daughter is Maria, correct? Second-year nursing student at State." Carlos's eyes widened. "How do you?" You mentioned her to Ms. Mitchell once, during your coffee break. James smiled. You should be very proud. I hear her clinical reviews are exceptional. Sarah's mind raced. How could James know that? She'd had one conversation with Carlos weeks ago in a quiet moment that lasted maybe 5 minutes. Had James been listening, watching? Before she could ask, the bell rang, sharp, insistent, signaling the end of the period. Classroom doors burst open, and students flooded the hallways like water from a broken dam. James checked his watch. I should go, but Ms. Mitchell, Mr. Mendez, thank you for what you do here. This place runs because of people like you, not despite you. Remember that. He walked away then, disappearing into the crowd of students with the ease of a ghost. Carlos turned to Sarah, his weathered face creased with confusion. Did that just happen? I think so, Sarah said, though I'm not entirely sure what that was. He's strange, Carlos said slowly, but kind strange, not mean strange. He began pushing his cart toward the east wing. Thank you, Sarah, for standing up. Most people don't. After he left, Sarah stood alone in the hallway, watching students stream past her like she was a rock in their river. Invisible again, furniture again. Except she didn't feel invisible anymore. She felt watched. At lunch, Sarah ate alone in the small break room reserved for custodial staff, a windowless box with a microwave that hummed ominously and a refrigerator covered in safety notices. She was halfway through her sandwich when Rebecca appeared in the doorway. May I join you? Rebecca asked. Sarah gestured to the empty chair, surprised. Rebecca sat down with her own lunch, salad in a glass container, and apples sliced into precise segments. I wanted to apologize, she said without preamble, for this morning, for how Richard treated you. You didn't do anything wrong. I didn't do anything right either. Rebecca stabbed a piece of lettuce with more force than necessary. I've watched Richard treat support staff like they're invisible for 3 years. I tell myself it's not my business, that I can't control how he behaves, but silence is complicity, isn't it? Sarah didn't know how to respond. The words felt too big for a break room, too honest for a Tuesday. That man this morning, Rebecca continued. James, did he say anything to you about why he's here? Not really, Sarah admitted. He seems to know a lot about the school, though. Richard looked genuinely shaken after he left. I've never seen that before. Rebecca's expression turned thoughtful. Richard Thornton doesn't shake easily. His family endowed half the buildings on this campus. He walks around like he owns the place. Maybe he needed to be reminded that he doesn't, Sarah said quietly. Rebecca smiled. Maybe we all do. They ate in companionable silence for a few minutes. Then Rebecca spoke again, her voice careful. Can I ask you something personal? Sarah's defenses rose automatically. You can ask. You're smart, too smart for this job, no offense. None taken. So why are you here, really? Sarah set down her sandwich, her appetite vanishing. The question hung in the air like smoke. She could deflect, could offer some vague explanation about needing a fresh start. But something in Rebecca's face, genuine curiosity without judgment, made her want to tell the truth. I was a doctor, Sarah said. A good one, until I rejected the wrong person's advances and he decided to destroy my career. Rebecca's expression shifted, shock, then anger, then something softer that looked like grief. Oh, Sarah. It's fine, I'm fine. The words were automatic muscle memory from 8 months of people asking if she was okay. The investigation apparently went public last week, so maybe eventually my name gets cleared, but right now this is my life, and it's honest work, so. She trailed off, unsure how to finish the sentence. Rebecca reached across the small table and squeezed Sarah's hand briefly. For what it's worth, this school is lucky to have you, even if they're too stupid to realize it. The kindness hurt more than cruelty. Sarah blinked against sudden tears. Thank you. They finished lunch together, talking about smaller things, Rebecca's daughter's upcoming college applications, the weather turning colder, the school play auditions starting next week. Normal things, human things. When Sarah returned to work, she felt slightly less alone. The afternoon passed in routine tasks, emptying trash bins, mopping floors, restocking soap dispensers. At 3:15, as students flooded out for the day, Sarah was cleaning the main stairwell when she heard her name. Ms. Mitchell. She turned to find Maria Rodriguez, sophomore, quiet girl who always said thank you when Sarah held doors, hurrying toward her, her backpack bouncing. "Hi, Marius. I just wanted to say," Maria glanced around as if checking for eavesdroppers. "What you did for Mr. Carlos this morning, that was really brave. My friend told me about it. Ethan Morrison is basically untouchable because of his dad, and you stood up to him anyway." "Mr. Carlos deserved someone standing with him," Sarah said simply. "I know it's just most adults here don't stand up to students like Ethan, I mean. They're afraid of parent complaints or losing donations or whatever." Maria shifted her weight, suddenly shy. "Anyway, I just wanted you to know that some of us notice. The students who aren't jerks, I mean. We see how hard you work and how the entitled kids treat you, and it's not right, but you make this place better." Before Sarah could respond, Maria hurried away, leaving Sarah standing on the stairs with something warm and bright expanding in her chest. "You make this place better." Such simple words, but they felt like water in a desert. Sarah finished the stairwell and pushed her cart toward the main office, planning to restock their supply closet. But as she approached, she heard Richard's voice through the partially open door, sharp with frustration. "I don't care who he claims to be, Patricia. Find out. Run background checks if you have to. I want to know who James Westbrook is and why he's wandering my school like he owns it." Patricia, the school secretary, 50-something with reading glasses on a chain, responded in lower tones Sarah couldn't make out. "Well, he's not on any approved visitor lists," Richard continued. "And yet he seems to know details about students, staff, the building itself. It's unnerving. Get security to escort him out if he returns. And alert the faculty, stranger danger protocols." Sarah moved away quickly, her heart racing. So Richard was threatened by James, interesting. She spent the rest of the afternoon thinking about James Westbrook, the way he defended her, and Carlos, the strange depth of his knowledge, the complete calm in the face of Richard's bluster. Who was he, and why did he care so much about janitors? At 5:30, as Sarah was preparing to leave for the day, she found an envelope tucked under her windshield wiper. Plain, white, no markings. Inside, a note written in precise handwriting. "Ms. Mitchell, the investigation into Dr. Harrison will conclude by month's end. You will be vindicated. In the meantime, your resilience is remarkable. Keep showing these students what dignity looks like. J.W." Sarah sat in her car, reading the note 3 times, her hands shaking. Who was James Westbrook? And how did he know so much about her life? The envelope sat on Sarah's kitchen counter for 2 days, unopened after that first reading, but impossible to ignore. Each morning, as she made instant coffee in her studio apartment, the cheapest place she could find after selling everything worth selling, she would glance at those precise letters spelling out impossible promises. "You will be vindicated." How could anyone know that? Wednesday passed in mechanical routine. Thursday brought rain that turned Westbridge's beautiful campus into an impressionist painting of gray and green. Sarah mopped floors that students tracked mud across minutes after she cleaned them. She restocked paper towels. She emptied trash bins filled with half-eaten lunches from kids who'd never known hunger. She did not see James. By Friday, she'd almost convinced herself he'd been a fevered dream, some manifestation of her desperate need for someone to care about her humiliation. But then, at 7:15 a.m., as she was cleaning the administration hallway, Patricia's voice echoed through the office door. "Mr. Thornton, there's someone here to see you. He doesn't have an appointment, but he's insistent." Richard's response was muffled, but his tone carried clear irritation. Then James's voice, calm as still water, "This won't take long." Sarah shouldn't have listened, she knew that. But her hands stilled on the window she was cleaning, and her body went quiet the way prey goes quiet when predators are near. "Mr. Westbrook," Richard's voice dripped with false courtesy, "I'm afraid I'm going to have to ask you to make an appointment through proper channels. We have protocols." "Protocols?" James said the word like he was tasting it. "Yes, let's discuss protocols. Specifically, the protocol for addressing staff complaints about hostile work environment." Silence, the kind that has weight. "I'm not sure what you're suggesting," Richard said carefully. "I'm suggesting that Ms. Sarah Mitchell and Mr. Carlos Mendez have both experienced harassment from students that administration has systematically ignored. I'm suggesting that your protocols protect wealthy families who donate generously while leaving the people who actually maintain this institution vulnerable to daily humiliation. That's absurd. If there were legitimate complaints. There are, James's voice remained conversational, but something steel had entered it. I've documented 12 incidents in the past month alone, students using derogatory language toward custodial staff, physical intimidation, deliberate destruction of cleaned areas. Would you like me to continue? Sarah's heart hammered against her ribs. He'd been documenting. Mr. Westbrook, I don't know what kind of agenda you're pursuing, but you can't just walk into my school and… Your school, James interrupted. Interesting phrasing. Another silence, longer this time. I think this conversation is over, Richard said. Patricia, please call security. That won't be necessary. James's voice moved closer to the door. I'll leave. But Mr. Thornton, a word of advice. Start paying attention to how people are treated in these hallways. You might be surprised what you learn. Footsteps approached the door. Sarah grabbed her cleaning supplies and retreated quickly, but not quickly enough. James emerged from the office and spotted her immediately. His expression shifted, surprise, then something that might have been concern. Ms. Mitchell. Mr. Westbrook, Sarah tried to sound casual, like she hadn't been eavesdropping. I was just cleaning the windows. Of course, his eyes studied her face, reading things she didn't want visible. Could we talk, after your shift perhaps? I don't think. Please, the single word carried unexpected vulnerability. I owe you an explanation. Sarah glanced toward the office, where Richard was undoubtedly listening. Not here. There's a coffee shop 3 blocks north. Rosie's, do you know it? She nodded. 5:30, James asked. Against every instinct screaming warnings, Sarah heard herself say, okay. He smiled brief, grateful, and left. Richard emerged from his office moments later, his face flushed. He looked at Sarah like she was a problem he needed to solve. Ms. Mitchell, a moment. Her stomach clenched, sir. That man, Mr. Westbrook, how well do you know him? I don't, not really. But he's approached you multiple times. It wasn't a question, but Sarah answered anyway. He's been kind, that's all. Richard's expression suggested he found kindness suspicious. If he contacts you again, I want you to report it immediately. To me personally. He's not authorized to be on campus, and his behavior is concerning. Concerning how? Richard's jaw tightened. That's not your concern, just report any contact, understood. Understood, Sarah said, though she had no intention of complying. After Richard retreated to his office, Patricia caught Sarah's eye and mouthed, good luck. The older woman's expression carried something Sarah. H couldn't quite read, sympathy mixed with something else. Warning, maybe. The rest of the day dragged like pulling teeth. Sarah cleaned bathrooms, restocked supplies, swept hallways, routine tasks that left her mind free to spiral. Who was James Westbrook really? How had he documented incidents she'd witnessed herself? And why did Richard seem so threatened by him? At 5:15, Sarah changed out of her work clothes in the custodial bathroom, a fresh shirt, her nice jeans, minimal makeup. She told herself this wasn't a date, just coffee, just information. But her hands shook as she applied mascara, and she recognized the feeling blooming in her chest. Hope, dangerous, reckless hope. Rosie's Coffee was the kind of place that smelled like cinnamon and had books on every available surface. James sat at a corner table, 2 cups already waiting, his attention fixed on his phone. When Sarah approached, he stood, an old-fashioned gesture that surprised her. Thank you for coming, he said. I wasn't sure you would. I'm not sure I should have. Sarah sat down, accepting the coffee he pushed toward her. Vanilla latte. You had one from the faculty break room cart last week. I noticed. You notice a lot. It's a habit. James sat across from her, his gray eyes serious. And the reason I asked you here, I owe you honesty. Sarah wrapped her hands around the warm cup. Start with your name. Is it really James Westbrook? Yes and no. He paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Legally, it's James Westbrook Davidson. I dropped the Davidson part years ago. Fewer questions that way. Davidson, the name tugged at something in Sarah's memory. Like Davidson Hall, the science building at Westbridge. Named after my grandfather, Harrison Davidson. He founded Westbridge Academy in 1952. James said it simply, like revealing he owned a car rather than a legacy. My mother was his only child. She inherited controlling interest when he died. When she passed 5 years ago, that interest transferred to me. Sarah's coffee suddenly tasted like dust. You own the school. Technically, I'm the majority shareholder, 73%. James's expression remained neutral, but his fingers drummed once against his coffee cup, a nervous tell. The board operates with relative autonomy, but ultimate authority rests with me. The coffee shop noises, conversations, espresso machine hissing, acoustic music playing softly, faded into white noise. Sarah's mind raced through every interaction, reframing them with this new information. Richard doesn't know, she said slowly. No, very few people do. I prefer it that way. James leaned forward slightly. My mother believed institutions functioned best when leadership wasn't constantly performing for ownership, so she established a trust structure that keeps my identity separate from operational management. The board knows there's a Davidson heir, but they communicate through lawyers. They've never met me. Then why reveal yourself now? Why get involved? Because I've been watching what happens in that building for 2 years, and I'm ashamed. The words came out raw, stripped of his usual calm. I've seen students treat staff like servants. I've watched administrators prioritize donations over dignity. I've documented systematic failures of basic human decency, and I've done nothing except collect evidence and tell myself I was waiting for the right moment. He looked down at his untouched coffee, and Sarah saw something she hadn't expected: guilt. Then you arrived, James continued, and I watched you clean floors with your medical degree hanging like an anchor around your neck. I watched you absorb daily humiliation without complaint, and I realized the right moment isn't coming. There is no right moment. There's only action or complicity. Sarah's throat felt tight. You could have just introduced yourself normally, told me who you were. Would you have believed me? Would you have trusted some stranger claiming to own the school, offering help? James's gray eyes found hers. Or would you have assumed I was another powerful man with an agenda? The honesty of it hit like cold water. He was right. After Dr. Harrison, after watching her career burn because she'd trusted the wrong person's kindness, Sarah would have run from anyone claiming power and offering help. So instead you defended me, she said. Defended Carlos, made Richard nervous without explaining why. I needed to see the culture up close, how people behaved when they thought no one important was watching. James's jaw tightened. The results were worse than I expected. Richard Thornton has created an environment where cruelty is tolerated as long as it comes from the right families, where staff complaints disappear into filing cabinets, where the message is clear: money matters more than people. And now what? Sarah asked. You've seen it, you've documented it, what happens next? That depends, James pulled a folder from his bag and set it on the table between them, on whether you trust me enough to read this. Sarah opened the folder with trembling fingers. Inside, medical board letterhead, official seals, legal language dense as fog. But the key phrases jumped out like searchlights. Investigation into Dr. Philip Harrison concludes with findings of gross misconduct. 4 victims have provided testimony corroborating pattern of sexual harassment and professional retaliation. Dr. Sarah Mitchell's forced resignation now recognized as wrongful termination resulting from harassment complaints. Hospital administration has offered full reinstatement with back pay and formal apology. The pages blurred. Sarah realized she was crying, silent tears that felt like pressure releasing from a wound. This is real, her voice came out broken. This is really happening. The medical board finalized their findings yesterday. It'll be public by Monday. James's voice was gentle. Metropolitan General's legal team wants to settle quickly and quietly. They're afraid of lawsuits. Your lawyer, you do have a lawyer. I can't afford. You can now. James pulled out another document. This is a retainer agreement with Morrison and Chen, best medical malpractice firm in the state. They're handling your case pro bono because I asked them to, because you deserve someone fighting for you. Sarah stared at the papers, at this impossible reversal of fortune, at this stranger who somehow knew exactly what she needed before she could ask for it. Why, the question came out as a whisper, why do you care so much? James was quiet for a long moment. The coffee shop sounds filtered back in, laughter from a nearby table, the barista calling out orders, rain beginning to patter against the windows. My mother, he said finally, worked her way up from nothing. Scholarships, student loans, 2 jobs while attending community college. She met my father at a hospital fundraiser. She was catering, he was a donor. They fell in love despite every social barrier telling them it was impossible. He paused, his fingers tracing the rim of his coffee cup. When my grandfather found out his only daughter was dating a caterer's son, he cut her off completely. Told her she could have the family money or the man she loved, but not both. She chose love. James's expression held old grief, the kind that never fully heals. They struggled. My father worked construction, my mother got her nursing degree. They were happy, but it was hard, really hard. What happened? Sarah asked softly. My father died in a construction accident when I was 7, faulty equipment, inadequate safety protocols, a company that valued profit over worker protection. James's voice remained steady, but his eyes were distant. My mother sued. It took 4 years, but she won. The settlement was enough to finish my education, to give us stability, but the cost. He didn't finish the sentence. He didn't need to. A few years later, my grandfather's health failed. He was dying, alone, and apparently spending his final months reconsidering his choices. He reached out to my mother. They reconciled in a way, enough that when he died, she inherited everything: the school, the trust, the legacy. And she gave it to you, Sarah said. She tried to make it right, spent 15 years reforming the school, implementing new policies, creating scholarship programs for students from backgrounds like hers. James's expression softened with memory. She believed education should be equalizing, not stratifying. That dignity shouldn't be determined by income brackets. She sounds remarkable. She was, James met Sarah's eyes, pancreatic cancer, stage 4 by the time they caught it. She had 8 months. Spent them making sure the school's mission would survive her, making me promise I'd protect what she built. Understanding clicked into place. That's why you're doing this, for her. For her, for the version of me that watched my father die because someone decided his safety was less important than quarterly profits. For every person who's ever been told their worth is determined by their position rather than their character. James leaned forward, intense. Sarah, I've spent 2 years watching Westbridge drift away from everything my mother believed in. Richard Thornton represents everything she fought against: casual cruelty dressed in expensive suits, power wielded without empathy, wealth used as weapon rather than responsibility. So fire him, Sarah said. You own the school, you have the power. Power wielded carelessly creates resentment, not change. James shook his head. If I walk in tomorrow and fire Richard, the board revolts. The wealthy families pull their students. The press writes stories about unstable leadership and institutional chaos. Richard becomes a martyr and nothing actually improves. Then what's your plan? To expose the culture systematically, to document the rot until even the board can't ignore it, to give the people Richard has hurt, staff, students, faculty who have stayed silent, a chance to speak up with protection. James's expression turned determined, and to find someone with the courage and credibility to lead the reform from inside. Sarah's breath caught. You can't mean. I need someone Richard won't see coming. Someone who understands what it means to be dismissed and underestimated. Someone with spine enough to stand up to entitled bullies and heart enough to care about janitors and students equally. James held her gaze. I need you, Sarah. I'm a janitor, she said automatically. You're a doctor, a leader, someone who chose dignity over bitterness despite every reason to be bitter. James opened another folder. This is a position description: Director of Student Welfare and Institutional Culture. It's a new role, one I'm creating. Faculty-level position, full benefits, salary commensurate with your medical background. Your job would be to oversee student well-being, investigate complaints, recommend policy changes, and report directly to me. Sarah looked at the job description, at the salary that was triple what she currently made, at the responsibilities that looked simultaneously terrifying and exhilarating. Richard would fight this, she said. Richard doesn't have a choice. This appointment comes from ownership. He can object, but he can't overrule it. James's expression turned serious. But Sarah, I need to be clear. This won't be easy. You'll face resistance. Wealthy parents will complain. Students who have never been held accountable will rebel. Richard will make your life difficult in every way he legally can. So why would I say yes? Because you're someone who stands up for Carlos Mendez when no one else will. Because you've already survived professional assassination and came out still believing in dignity and fairness. Because I think you need this as much as Westbridge does. James paused. And because you deserve better than cleaning floors with a medical degree, no matter what Philip Harrison tried to make you believe. The rain outside had intensified, creating a cocoon of sound around their corner table. Sarah looked at the documents spread before her, proof of Harrison's downfall, offers of reinstatement, opportunities for reinvention. If I say yes, she said slowly, I want protections, for Carlos, for any staff member who speaks up. I want it in writing that they can't be fired or punished for honest complaints. Done. And I want transparency. If you're going to use me as a weapon against Richard, I deserve to know the full strategy. Agreed. And I want, Sarah paused, searching for words. I want to know this isn't some savior complex, that you're not collecting broken people to fix because it makes you feel noble. James flinched slightly, the first crack in his composure. That's fair. An honest answer, I don't know. Maybe there is some savior complex wrapped up in this. Maybe I'm trying to redeem my grandfather's cruelty by being the person he wasn't. Maybe I'm fighting battles my mother can't fight anymore. He met her eyes directly. But my motivations don't change the fact that what's happening at Westbridge is wrong. They don't change the fact that you're overqualified for invisibility. They don't make the job offer less real or the mission less necessary. Sarah sat with that honesty, turning it over like a stone in her palm. She'd spent 8 months waiting for someone to save her, to vindicate her, to prove that the universe still contained justice. And here was someone offering exactly that, wrapped in complications and mixed motives and uncomfortable questions about power and redemption. But it was also real. The medical board findings were real. The job offer was real. The chance to matter again was real. I need to think about it, she said finally. Of course, James closed the folders gently. Take the weekend. But Sarah, the medical board announcement goes public Monday morning. Metropolitan General will contact you directly. Your life is about to change regardless of what you decide about Westbridge. I know, the weight of it pressed against her chest, hope mixed with terror mixed with exhaustion. Thank you for caring, for fighting, for seeing me when everyone else looked away. You made yourself easy to see, James said simply. You just needed someone willing to look. They finished their coffee talking about smaller things, James's current work as a consultant, Sarah's studio apartment and its temperamental radiator, books they'd both read, movies that had made them cry. By the time they left, rain soaking them both within seconds, Sarah felt something shift inside her chest. For 8 months she'd been drowning. Now finally someone had thrown her a rope. The question was whether she had the courage to grab it. Act 4, Rising Conflict. Saturday morning arrived with weak sunlig. HT and the kind of cold that made breathing feel sharp. Sarah woke at 6 a.m. out of habit, then remembered she didn't have to work weekends. The freedom felt strange, like wearing shoes on the wrong feet. She made coffee and spread the documents James had given her across her tiny kitchen table. Medical board findings, job offer, employment contract with terminology she didn't fully understand, but that looked legitimate and generous. Her phone buzzed, unknown number. Hello. Dr. Mitchell, a woman's voice, professional and warm. This is Catherine Chen from Morrison and Chen Legal. James Westbrook asked us to reach out regarding your case against Metropolitan General. Dr. Mitchell, the title landed like a gift she'd forgotten she owned. They talked for 40 minutes. Catherine explained the settlement offer, full reinstatement with back pay, formal apology, guaranteed letter of recommendation, confidentiality agreement that Sarah was under no obligation to sign. She explained the alternative: litigation, publicity, the chance to expose Harrison's pattern of abuse publicly, but also the emotional cost of reliving trauma in depositions and courtrooms. What would you do? Sarah asked finally. Catherine was quiet for a moment. Honestly, I'd consider what outcome serves your healing best. Justice looks different for different people. Some need public vindication. Others need privacy and closure. Only you know which one you are. After they hung up, Sarah sat with the question. What did she need? What would heal the wound Philip Harrison had carved into her life? The answer came slowly, like dawn. She needed to matter again. She needed work that used her skills and fed her purpose. She needed to wake up each day with somewhere important to go and something meaningful to do. She needed Westbridge. Sunday passed in preparation. Sarah researched institutional culture, read articles about student welfare programs, studied Westbridge's handbook and mission statement. She made notes about changes she'd recommend, policies she'd implement, battles she'd need to fight. She was terrified, but also, for the first time in 8 months, she was excited. Monday morning, Sarah dressed carefully, professional but not apologetic, confident but not aggressive. She arrived at Westbridge at 6:30 a.m. before most faculty. Her janitor's cart sat in the custodial closet where she'd left it Friday evening. She touched it once, gently, a goodbye to the woman who'd pushed it through these halls while carrying shame she didn't deserve. Then she walked to the main office. Patricia looked up from her computer and did a double take. "Sarah, you look different. Did you get good news?" "Something like that," Sarah's heart hammered. "Is Principal Davidson in yet?" "Principal Reeves. Not until 8 usually. Wait, did you say Davidson?" Before Sarah could explain, the office door opened and James walked in, carrying a briefcase and wearing a suit that probably cost more than Sarah's monthly rent. He looked different, polished, authoritative, every inch the owner he'd hidden so carefully. "Good morning, Patricia," he said pleasantly. "Could you please ask Mr. Thornton to join me in the conference room and gather the department heads? I'm calling an emergency meeting." Patricia's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. James turned to Sarah. "Dr. Mitchell, thank you for coming early, shall we?" They walked together to the conference room, a space Sarah had only ever cleaned, never occupied. James set his briefcase down and turned to face her. "Are you sure?" he asked quietly. "Once we do this, there's no going back. Richard will make your life difficult. Some faculty will resent you. Parents will complain. It's going to be brutal for a while." "I'm sure," Sarah said and meant it. "Then let's burn it down and build it better." By 7:15, the conference room was full, department heads looking confused, Richard looking increasingly furious, Patricia hovering near the door with her notepad clutched like a shield. Rebecca caught Sarah's eye and mouthed, "What's happening?" James stood at the head of the table with the calm of someone who'd always belonged there. "Thank you for coming on short notice. I'm sure you're wondering who I am and why I've called this meeting." He paused. "My name is James Westbrook Davidson. I'm the majority owner of Westbridge Academy and the heir to the Davidson Family Trust." The room erupted. Richard's face went through several colors before settling on dangerous red. "This is absurd. Patricia, call security." "Mr. Thornton," James's voice cut through the chaos like a blade, "sit down." Something in his tone made Richard sit. James opened his briefcase and distributed folders to each person. "Inside, you'll find documentation of systematic failures in our institutional culture over the past 2 years. Incidents of harassment, discrimination, and hostile work environment targeting custodial staff, junior faculty, ND scholarship students, complaints that were filed and ignored, patterns of behavior that we, as an institution, have enabled through inaction." Sarah watched faces change as people read, shock, shame, recognition. "I take full responsibility," James continued. "My absence from operational management created a vacuum. That vacuum filled with behaviors and attitudes that violate everything this school was founded to represent. With all due respect," Richard's voice was tight, "you can't just appear after years of silence and accuse this administration of—" "I'm not accusing, I'm stating facts." James remained calm. "And I'm announcing changes. Effective immediately, Westbridge is creating a new position, Director of Student Welfare and Institutional Culture. This person will report directly to me, will have authority to investigate complaints without administrative interference, and will implement reforms to ensure every person in this building, student, faculty, or staff, is treated with dignity." "That's irregular," Richard objected. "The board should be consulted." "The board will be informed. This decision comes from ownership." James's expression was unreadable, "and I'm appointing Dr. Sarah Mitchell to the position." Every head in the room turned to Sarah. She stood, her legs somehow steady despite the adrenaline screaming through her system. "Some of you know me as a janitor," she said clearly. "You've seen me clean your offices and empty your trash bins. You've walked past me in hallways like I was furniture." She paused, letting the words land. "But I'm also a medical doctor who spent 3 years as an emergency resident before being forced out by a man who weaponized his power against me for refusing his advances." Rebecca's intake of breath was audible. "I know what it means to be dismissed," Sarah continued. "To have your worth determined by your position rather than your character, to be invisible despite standing right in front of people. I've lived it." she looked at Richard directly. And I've watched others live it here. That ends now. This is outrageous, Richard stood, his face purple. You can't appoint a janitor, excuse me, a former janitor, to a faculty-level position without board approval, without proper vetting. Dr. Mitchell's qualifications exceed most of our current faculty, James interrupted. Medical degree from Johns Hopkins, clinical experience, crisis management training, and most importantly, first-hand understanding of the culture we need to change. She's been vetted. She's been hired. The only question is whether you're going to support this initiative or obstruct it. The room held its breath. Richard's jaw worked soundlessly for a moment. Then, I'll be contacting the board and my lawyer. This is procedurally irregular and possibly illegal. Contact anyone you wish, James said mildly, but I suggest you read your employment contract first, specifically the sections regarding ownership, authority, and grounds for termination. You'll find them illuminating. The threat hung in the air, unsubtle and effective. James turned to the rest of the room. Department heads, you'll receive detailed memos this afternoon outlining policy changes and expectations. Dr. Mitchell will be scheduling meetings with each of you over the next 2 weeks. I expect full cooperation. He paused. This school can be what my mother built it to be, a place where education equalizes rather than stratifies, but only if we're willing to do the uncomfortable work of honest reform. Questions. Silence, the kind that meant everyone had questions but was too shocked to voice them. Excellent, meeting adjourned. Mr. Thornton, my office now. People filed out slowly, stealing glances at Sarah like she was a bomb that might detonate. Rebecca lingered near the door, her expression complicated. Sarah, she said quietly, I didn't know about your background, about what happened to you. Most people didn't, that was kind of the point. Sarah managed a smile. But Rebecca, you were kind to me when I was just a janitor. That matters, don't think it doesn't. Rebecca's eyes went shiny. You're going to be amazing at this. Or I'm going to crash and burn spectacularly. Well, either way, it'll be interesting. Rebecca squeezed her arm briefly. Come find me later. I have 17 years of institutional knowledge about who actually runs this place, and it's not who you think. After she left, Sarah stood alone in the conference room, staring at the table where her life had just changed direction again. Through the window, she could see students beginning to arrive, spilling out of cars and buses, their voices carrying through the morning air. Somewhere in the building, Richard was probably being told his authority had just been superseded. Somewhere, faculty were gossiping about the janitor who was now their colleague. Somewhere, Carlos was probably starting his shift, unaware that everything had shifted. Sarah's phone buzzed, text from an unknown number. Medical Board public statement released. Harrison's medical license suspended pending further investigation. Metropolitan General offering formal apology and settlement. You won, Dr. Mitchell. Below it, a link to a news article. Sarah clicked it with trembling fingers. Prominent surgeon suspended following harassment investigation. Dr. Philip Harrison, respected cardiovascular surgeon at Metropolitan General Hospital, has had his medical license suspended following a multi-month investigation into allegations of sexual harassment and professional retaliation. 4 women, including 3 former colleagues and 1 resident, have provided testimony describing a pattern of predatory behavior spanning 7 years. Sarah read the entire article standing in that conference room, tears streaming down her face. Not sad tears, something else. Relief, vindication, the violent joy of watching truth finally matter. Her phone rang, Catherine Chen. Did you see? Catherine asked. Just now. Metropolitan wants to settle quickly. Full reinstatement offer stands, plus significant financial compensation for emotional distress and career damage. We're talking mid-6 figures, Sarah, and they'll seal Harrison's personnel file from his time there, which means his reputation never recovers. Catherine's voice carried satisfaction. You destroyed him without having to relive your trauma in court. That's a win. It doesn't feel real yet, Sarah admitted. It will, trust me. Catherine paused. James mentioned you took the Westbridge position. That's brave. You sure you don't want to come back to medicine? Maybe someday, but right now, I think I'm exactly where I need to be. After they hung up, Sarah walked slowly through the hallways, seeing them differently now. Not as spaces she cleaned, but as spaces she'd protect. Students were flooding in, loud and alive, unaware that the woman passing them in professional clothes had been invisible to them just days before. She found Carlos in the east wing, emptying a trash bin. Carlos. He turned, did a double take. Sarah, you look, what happened? Can we talk somewhere private? They stepped into an empty classroom. Sarah closed the door and faced him, this kind man who'd shown her pictures of his daughter and shared coffee and weathered daily humiliation with quiet grace. Something changed, she said. Something big, and I need you to know what happened with Ethan Morrison last week. That's not acceptable anymore. I'm making it my job to ensure it never happens again. Carlos's weathered face creased with confusion. I don't understand. I'm not a janitor anymore. Well, I am, but I'm also. It's complicated. Sarah laughed shakily. The school has a new owner who's actually been here the whole time, watching how people treat staff, and he offered me a position protecting people like you from people like Ethan. The man from last week, Carlos said slowly. James, he owns the school. His family founded it, he inherited it, and he's decided things need to change. Carlos sat down heavily in a student desk, his large frame comical in the small space. Mother of God. Carlos, I need you to do something for me. I need you to write down every incident where a student or faculty member treated you badly. Dates if you remember them, details, witnesses, everything. Why? Because I'm building a case for cultural reform, and your voice matters, your experience matters. Sarah crouched beside the desk so they were eye level. You deserve better than daily humiliation. Your daughter deserves a father who comes home feeling valued rather than diminished. Will you help me? Carlos's eyes went shiny. You really mean it. You're really going to try to change things. I'm really going to change things, Sarah corrected. With your help, with testimonies from everyone who's been treated as less than, we're going to make Westbridge actually live up to its mission statement. Okay, Carlos said, his voice thick. Okay, yes, I'll write it down. They talked for another 10 minutes, Sarah explaining the new position, Carlos sharing stories that made her blood boil. A student who deliberately knocked over his cleaning bucket and laughed. A teacher who'd asked him to clean during lunch because it's what he's paid for anyway. Small cruelties, casually delivered, systematically ignored. No more, Sarah promised. Starting now, no more. The day unfolded in a series of careful confrontations. Sarah met with Rebecca, who provided a detailed map of institutional politics, which faculty members would support reform, which would resist, which wealthy families had enough power to make trouble. She met with the school counselor, a soft-spoken woman named Dr. Lin who'd been trying for years to address bullying culture and hitting bureaucratic walls at every turn. Someone's finally listening, Dr. Lin said, her voice breaking slightly. Do yo. You know how long I've been documenting incidents and having them dismissed as kids being kids. I know, Sarah said, and I'm sorry, but we're listening now, tell me everything. At lunch, Sarah ate in the faculty lounge for the first time as a colleague rather than staff. The silence when she entered was deafening. She sat beside Rebecca, who immediately started a loud conversation about an upcoming curriculum change, giving others permission to pretend everything was normal. But nothing was normal. Sarah could feel the stares, the whispered conversations, the assessment happening behind polite smiles. Around 2:30 p.m., James appeared at her new office, a small space near the counseling center, barely furnished but hers. He knocked despite the open door. How's your first day as Director Mitchell? Terrifying and exhilarating in equal measure. Sarah gestured to the empty bookshelf. I'll need to buy books and maybe a plant. Do I seem like a plant person? You seem like someone who'll make this place grow whether or not you have plants. James's smile was warm. Richard requested a board meeting, emergency session tomorrow evening. He's going to fight back. Expected. Be prepared for it to get ugly. He'll question your qualifications, your hiring process, your motivations. He'll suggest you're emotionally compromised, unstable, possibly manipulating me for personal gain. Sarah's stomach clenched. Lovely. You're not alone in this. James's gray eyes were steady. I'll be at that meeting. Rebecca will be there. She's a board member. Did you know? She's already preparing a statement of support. Dr. Lin is compiling evidence. You have allies, Sarah. And enemies. Those too, but you've survived worse than Richard Thornton's wounded ego. James leaned against the doorframe. The students are talking, word travels fast, some are excited about change, others are scared their behavior will have consequences for the first time in their lives. Good, they should be scared. My mother would have liked you, James said suddenly. She believed education should comfort the disturbed and disturb the comfortable. You're about to do both simultaneously. Before Sarah could respond, a student appeared, Maria Rodriguez, the sophomore who'd thanked her last week. The girl stopped short, seeing James. Oh, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I just wanted to. She looked at Sarah. Is it true? You're really going to make it so we can report bullying and harassment and someone will actually listen? Yes, Sarah said firmly. That's exactly what I'm here for. Maria's eyes filled with tears. My friend Alina, she's been dealing with this group of girls all year. They mock her accent, hide her books, spread rumors. She reported it 3 times. Nothing happened. She's talking about transferring. Not anymore. Sarah found a notepad. Tell me everything. Names, dates, what was reported and to whom. Alina won't transfer. The girls harassing her will face actual consequences instead. Maria sat down and talked for 20 minutes. When she finished, Sarah had 4 pages of notes and a burning determination to make an example of this case. After Maria left, James was quiet for a moment. You're going to change everything, he said softly. We're going to change everything, Sarah corrected. You gave me the platform, I'm just using it. Use it well, James straightened. I should go, but Sarah, thank you for taking this risk, for believing it's possible. Thank you for seeing me when I was invisible. James paused at the door. You were never invisible. You were just surrounded by people who'd learned not to look. After he left, Sarah sat in her new office, staring at blank walls that would soon hold certificates and mission statements and evidence of change. Through the window, she could see students walking to their next classes, loud and young and mostly unaware that their world was about to shift. Her phone buzzed, text from an unknown number. We know who you are. We know you're trying to destroy Richard. Back off or there will be consequences. Sarah stared at the message, her heart rate spiking. Then she screenshot it, forwarded it to James and Catherine Chen, and responded simply. Try me. This was going to get ugly. She'd known that going in. But she'd survived Philip Harrison. She'd survived 8 months of humiliation and erasure and rebuilding from nothing. Richard Thornton didn't scare her. Nothing scared her anymore. Act 5, the climax/showdown. The emergency board meeting was scheduled for Tuesday at 7 p.m. in Westbridge's grand conference room, the one with oil paintings of founders and leather chairs that smelled like old money. Sarah arrived at 6:45, wearing her most conservative suit, carrying a folder thick enough to qualify as armor. Rebecca met her at the entrance. Nervous, Rebecca asked. Terrified. Good, you should be. Richard's been calling board members all day. He's framing this as institutey. Onal coup, emotional manipulation, possibly fraud. Rebecca's expression was grim. Half the board is already on his side. They don't like change, and they especially don't like being told their donations don't grant immunity for their children's behavior. What about the other half? Skeptical but persuadable. If you're credible, confident, and can demonstrate actual value, you might win them over. Rebecca paused. But Sarah, these people are professional intimidators. They've spent careers crushing opposition with money and connections. Don't let them make you small. I've been small for 8 months. I remember what it feels like. Sarah's jaw tightened. I'm done with small. They entered together. The conference room was already filling, board members in expensive suits, taking seats around the massive table like generals preparing for war. Richard sat at one end, his expression carefully neutral but his eyes sharp with anticipation. James sat at the opposite end, his posture relaxed but his attention focused. Sarah took a seat beside James. Rebecca sat across from them, offering a subtle nod of support. At exactly 7 p.m., the board chairman, an elderly man named Gerald Ashworth, old money and older attitudes, called the meeting to order. We're here, Gerald said gravely, to address highly irregular personnel decisions that may constitute breach of protocol. Mr. Thornton has raised concerns about the appointment of Dr. Sarah Mitchell to a newly created position without board consultation or proper vetting. Mr. Westbrook Davidson, as majority owner, you have authority to make unilateral decisions. but the board has fiduciary responsibility to question decisions that may damage the institution's reputation or financial stability. James nodded calmly. I understand the concern. I'm happy to answer questions. Why her? The question came from Catherine Brennan, board member and mother of two Westbridge students. She looked at Sarah with poorly disguised disdain. You hired a janitor, excuse me, a medical resident with a questionable departure from her previous position to oversee student welfare. That's not just irregular, it's potentially dangerous. Dr. Mitchell's departure was not questionable, James said before Sarah could respond. She was forced out by a superior who weaponized his position after she rejected his sexual advances. That superior is currently under investigation by the medical board, has had his license suspended, and faces possible criminal charges. Dr. Mitchell's name has been fully cleared, and Metropolitan General has offered substantial compensation for wrongful termination. Catherine's expression flickered, surprise, then discomfort. I wasn't aware. Most people weren't. That's how institutional power works. James's voice remained pleasant but firm. Dr. Mitchell was disappeared quietly to protect a predator's reputation. She spent 8 months rebuilding while watching her career burn. I hired her precisely because she understands how institutions fail vulnerable people. That's exactly the perspective Westbridge needs. But her qualifications, another board member started. Medical degree from Johns Hopkins, top of her class, 3 years of emergency residency, excellent clinical reviews, crisis management training, conflict resolution certification. James listed each qualification like weapons. Her credentials exceed most of our current faculty. The only question is whether you're uncomfortable with her qualifications or uncomfortable with her previous position as custodial staff. The room went very quiet. Richard leaned forward, his expression sympathetic in a way that made Sarah's skin crawl. James, I understand you feel strongly about class issues. Your mother's background, your family history, these clearly influence your perspective. But we can't make hiring decisions based on emotional reactions to perceived injustice. Dr. Mitchell may be qualified on paper, but she has no educational administration experience, no background in student affairs, and frankly, her time here as custodial staff raises questions about judgment. Why take a janitorial position if you have a medical degree? Because she couldn't afford to be unemployed while fighting a false accusation, James said coldly. Because she chose dignity and honest work over bankruptcy. Because she was surviving, which takes more strength than most people in this room will ever need. Or, Richard countered smoothly, because there were legitimate concerns about her performance that made medical work inadvisable. We've only heard one side of this story. Has anyone actually verified her version of events, or are we simply accepting her claims because they fit a convenient narrative? Sarah's fingernails dug into her palms. The implication was clear. She was lying, manipulative, using victimhood as currency. I have verification, she said, her voice steady despite the rage burning in her chest. She opened our folder and distributed copies around the table. Medical board findings, Metropolitan General's settlement offer, testimony from 4 women describing Dr. Harrison's pattern of harassment, and legal documentation of my complete exoneration. Board members flipped through pages, expressions changing as they read. Additionally, Sarah continued, I've spent the past 3 days documenting the exact issues my position was created to address. Harassment complaints that were filed and ignored. Students using racial slurs toward scholarship recipients with no consequences. Faculty witnessing assault and declining to intervene. A culture where money determines accountability and vulnerable people learn silence as survival strategy. She pulled out another stack of papers, Carlos's testimony, Dr. Lynn's documented reports, Maria's account of Alina's harassment, a dozen other voices speaking truth that had been systematically silenced. This is what I bring to Westbridge, Sarah said, looking directly at Richard. Not just credentials, but lived understanding of how institutions protect power over people. I know what it's like to file complaints that disappear into filing cabinets. I know what it feels like to be dismissed by people who never bothered to see you as human, and I know how to fix it. By undermining established authority, Richard's voice rose slightly. By encouraging complaints and creating a culture of victimhood where every discipline action becomes a discrimination case, you're going to turn this school into a litigation minefield. I'm going to turn this school into a place where all people, students, faculty, and staff, are treated with basic human dignity, Sarah corrected. If that feels threatening, ask yourself why. Mr. Thornton, James interjected before Richard could respond, you mentioned concerns about Dr. Mitchell's judgment. Let's discuss judgment. Specifically, your judgment in handling the following incidents. James pulled out his own folder, thick, organized, devastating. November 3rd, freshman student reported being sexually assaulted by senior student at off-campus party. You advised against police involvement, citing concerns about both families' reputations. Did I miss anything? Richard's face went pale. That case was handled sensitively, considering the complexities. The victim left Westbridge 2 months later. The perpetrator graduated without consequence. James's voice could have frozen water. October 17th, faculty member reported witnessing Vice Principal Thornton using derogatory language toward custodial staff. You filed an HR complaint against the faculty member for insubordination. Want to explain that decision? Personnel matters are confidential. September 29th, James continued relentlessly, scholarship students' family couldn't afford textbooks. Policy is to provide loaner materials. You denied the request because it creates dependency. The student fell behind academically and lost her scholarship. She's now attending community college despite having Ivy League potential. Good judgment. The board members shifted uncomfortably. Catherine Brennan was reading James's documentation with increasingly horrified expression. I could continue, James said. I have 2 years of documented failures, decisions that prioritized reputation over safety, policies that protected donors' children while punishing vulnerable students, a systematic pattern of valuing money over morality. This is character assassination, Richard snapped. You're building a case based on selective examples and biased interpretation. It's based on filed reports, witness testimony, and documented outcomes. James's gray eyes were arctic. You've created a culture where cruelty has no consequences as long as it's committed by the right people. That ends today. You can't fire me, Richard said, but his voice carried uncertainty. The board. The board can vote, Gerald Ashworth interrupted quietly. The elderly chairman looked tired suddenly, decades of uncomfortable compromises weighing on his shoulders. But James is right. I've served on this board for 12 years. I've watched us become something Elizabeth Davidson would be ashamed of. He looked at Sarah. Dr. Mitchell, what specifically would you change? Sarah had prepared for this question. She'd spent the last 48 hours building a comprehensive plan, talking to students and staff, researching best practices. Now she delivered it clearly, confidently, like presenting a treatment plan to a patient's frightened family. First, transparent complaint process with third-party oversight. Every incident gets documented, investigated, and resolved with written findings available to parties involved. No more disappeared reports. She pulled out her tablet, showing mock-ups of the reporting system. Second, mandatory bias training for all faculty and staff. Not performative diversity workshops, but actual educa. Tian about how unconscious prejudices affect decision-making and student outcomes. Nods around the table. Even skeptical board members seemed receptive. Third, student accountability board with representatives from different economic backgrounds. Discipline decisions made by committee rather than single administrator, ensuring fairness over favoritism. That undermines administrative authority, Richard objected. It ensures administrative authority is exercised fairly, Sarah countered. Fourth, regular climate surveys with anonymous feedback from students, faculty, and staff. We measure success not by donations or test scores alone, but by whether people feel safe, valued, and respected in this community. She looked around the table, meeting each board member's eyes. Westbridge's mission statement promises to develop character, foster excellence, and prepare students for ethical leadership. But we can't teach ethics we don't practice. We can't foster excellence in environments where people are valued by their family income rather than their character. And we can't develop leaders if we're teaching them that power means immunity from consequences. Silence, the oil paintings of founders watched from the walls, their expressions frozen in permanent judgment. Catherine Brennan spoke first. I'd like to see this implemented, trial period, say 6 months with quarterly reviews. Seconded, another board member said. I'd like to add, Rebecca said, her voice firm, that Dr. Mitchell's hiring represents exactly the kind of creative problem-solving Elizabeth Davidson championed. She didn't build this school by following conventional wisdom. She built it by taking risks on people others had dismissed. Hiring Dr. Mitchell honors that legacy. More nods, the tide was turning, Sarah could feel it. Richard stood abruptly. This is absurd. You're letting this woman, this former janitor, rewrite institutional policy based on isolated incidents and emotional appeals. The donors will revolt. Families will pull their students. Westbridge's reputation will be destroyed. Westbridge's reputation is already damaged, James said quietly. We just hide it well. This isn't about destruction, it's about redemption. I won't be part of it. Richard's voice shook with fury. If you implement these changes, if you allow this person to undermine everything I've built here, I'll resign. And I'll make sure every donor, every influential family, every person who matters knows exactly what happened here. Then resign, James said simply. The room gasped. Richard stared at James, clearly expecting the threat to work. When it didn't, his face cycled through emotions: shock, rage, fear. You're serious? Completely. Your vision of Westbridge is incompatible with its mission. You can resign with a generous severance and positive reference, or we can discuss the documented policy violations in detail, and you can resign with nothing. Your choice. Richard's mouth opened and closed. For the first time in the 3 months Sarah had known him, he looked genuinely uncertain. I built this place's reputation, he said finally. I've given 17 years. And in those 17 years, how many students learned that wealth equals immunity? How many vulnerable people learned that their voices don't matter? How many perpetrators of harassment and assault walked these halls without consequence because you were more concerned with donor relations than justice? James's voice was soft but relentless. You built something, Richard, just not what you think you built. Richard grabbed his briefcase, his movements jerky. You'll regret this, all of you. When the donations dry up, when the students leave, when this place becomes a social justice experiment that can't pay its bills, remember that I warned you. He walked out, his footsteps echoing through the conference room like a door slamming, closed on an era. After he left, Gerald Ashworth looked at the remaining board members. Do we need a formal vote, or is the direction clear? I move that we approve Dr. Mitchell's appointment and policy proposals, with 6-month review as Catherine suggested, Rebecca said. Seconded. All in favor. Hands rose around the table, not unanimous but enough, more than enough. Gerald nodded slowly. Dr. Mitchell, welcome to Westbridge Academy, officially this time. Try not to burn the place down in your first 6 months. I can't make any promises, Sarah said, and several board members actually laughed. The meeting concluded with logistics: start date, salary finalization, office setup. Sarah barely heard it. Her body was vibrating with adrenaline, her mind trying to process what had just happened. She'd won, they'd won. Richard Thornton was gone, and Westbridge Academy had a chance to be what it claimed to be. After the board members filed out, offering congratulations and warnings in equal measure, Sarah found herself alone in the conference room with James and Rebecca. That was terrifying, Sarah said, her voice shaking now that the performance was over. That was masterful, Rebecca corrected. You didn't back down, didn't apologize for existing, didn't let Richard make you small. Elizabeth Davidson would have stood up and applauded. James was quiet, his expression thoughtful. Richard will make good on his threat. Some donors will pull funding. Some families will withdraw students. The next few months will be financially precarious. But morally sound, Rebecca said firmly, and that's worth the cost. Is it? James looked genuinely uncertain for the first time since Sarah had met him. If we can't keep the doors open, if we have to cut programs or fire staff to survive, was this worth it? Sarah thought about Carlos, about Maria's friend Elena, about every person who'd learned to make themselves small to survive in spaces that should have protected them. Yes, she said firmly. Even if we fail, even if this experiment crashes and burns, at least we tried. At least we said that people matter more than money. That's worth something. That has to be worth something. James smiled then, tired but genuine. My mother used to say that institutions don't fail when they run out of money. They fail when they run out of moral courage. He stood, collected his papers. We have courage, that's a start. After he left, Rebecca and Sarah walked together through the empty hallways, their footsteps echoing in spaces that would look completely different tomorrow. "You okay?" Rebecca asked. "I don't know yet," Sarah admitted. "Ask me in 6 months when I'm either celebrated or fired." Or both simultaneously. Life's complicated that way. Rebecca paused at the exit. "Sarah, thank you for being brave enough to fight this fight. Some of us have been too comfortable, too complicit. You reminded us what we're supposed to stand for." After Rebecca left, Sarah stood alone in Westbridge's grand entrance, looking at the marble floors she used to clean. The building felt different now, not just physically, but spiritually. Like it was holding its breath, waiting to see what it might become. Her phone buzzed, text from James. "Thank you for everything, get some rest. Tomorrow starts the real work." Sarah drove home to her tiny studio apartment, made instant coffee despite it being nearly 10 p.m., and sat at her kitchen table staring at her medical board clearance letter. Dr. Sarah Mitchell. She could go back to medicine now. Metropolitan General wanted her back. Other hospitals would take her. She could reclaim the career Philip Harrison had tried to destroy. But she thought about Carlos's weathered face, about Maria's relief that someone would finally listen, about the way James had seen her when she was invisible. Westbridge needed her, and maybe she needed Westbridge too. She sent a text to Catherine Chen, declining Metropolitan's reinstatement offer, accepting their settlement payment, moving forward with Westbridge full-time. "Thank you for everything." Catherine's response came within minutes. "Proud of you, go change the world." Sarah fell asleep at her kitchen table, still wearing her power suit, dreaming of halls filled with people who saw each other clearly. Tomorrow, the real work began. Act 6, Resolution/Moral Payoff. 6 months later, Sarah stood in her office, no longer barely furnished, now filled with books on institutional reform, student-drawn artwork, a plant she was, it turned out, a plant person, and photographs of faces that reminded her why this mattered. The morning light streaming through her window illuminated a framed picture on her desk, Carlos and his daughter Maria at her nursing school graduation. Maria had sent it with a note, "Thank you for protecting my father. He comes home smiling now." Sarah's own transformation was subtler but no less complete. Gone was the woman who'd pushed a squeaky cleaning cart through these halls, shoulders curved inward, making herself small. In her place, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, Director of Student Welfare and Institutional Culture, wearing confidence like armor earned rather than borrowed. The past 6 months had been brutal and beautiful in equal measure. Richard's prediction came true, 3 major donors withdrew funding. 5 families pulled their students, citing concerns about political correctness and erosion of traditional values. The local press wrote think pieces questioning whether Westbridge's reforms were sustainable or simply performative. But other things happened too. Elena Rodriguez, the girl whose harassment Maria had reported, stayed at Westbridge. The 3 girls who tormented her faced actual consequences: suspension, mandatory counseling, transfer to different sections. Elena joined student government, found her voice, stopped looking at the ground when she walked. Carlos received a formal apology from the student who'd mocked him in the hallway. The apology came with genuine tears, real remorse, the end of growth that happens when entitled children are finally held accountable and realize that their actions affect real human beings. The anonymous complaint portal Sarah had implemented received 47 reports in the first month, evidence not of increased problems, but of voices finally believing they'd be heard. Each complaint was investigated thoroughly, resolved transparently. Some resulted in discipline. Others resulted in mediation, apology, restored relationship. All resulted in documentation that patterns of behavior would no longer be ignored. James had been right about the financial precariousness. The school's endowment took a hit. The board had uncomfortable conversations about budget cuts, but something unexpected happened. New donors emerged. Families who'd avoided Westbridge because of its reputation for casual cruelty suddenly became interested. Alumni who'd suffered in silence reached out, offering contributions to support the reforms. Foundations focused on educational equity and institutional justice took notice. The money didn't flow as generously as before, but it flowed honestly, aligned with mission rather than contradicting it. Sarah heard a knock on her office door. James stood in the doorway holding two coffees, vanilla latte for her, black coffee for himself. It had become their Tuesday morning ritual, coffee and debrief, planning and reflection. Morning, he said, brought sustenance. You're a saint. I'm really not. James sat in the chair across from her desk, the comfortable one she'd bought with her first paycheck. But I try. They sipped coffee in comfortable silence for a moment, a friendship forged in revolution and sustained through aftermath. Board meeting tonight, James said finally. 6-month review of your position and the policy changes. Nervous. Should you be? Sarah considered. 6 months ago, the question would have terrified her. Now she felt only steady certainty. No, she said, the numbers speak for themselves. Complaint resolution rate up by 340%. Student satisfaction scores improved across all demographics. Faculty retention increased. Incidents of harassment and discrimination documented and addressed rather than ignored and festering. Catherine Brennan wants to make your position permanent, James said. Remove the trial period designation, increase your budget, possibly hire additional staff for your department. Sarah's breath caught. Seriously. Her daughter came out to her last month. As gay, she'd been terrified to say anything because of the culture here, heard too many slurs in hallways, saw too many kids ostracized for being different. But after our reforms, after seeing actual consequences for hate speech and actual support for LGBTQ students, James's smile was warm. Her daughter felt safe enough to trust her. Catherine credits you. Tears pricked Sarah's eyes. That's everything, James finished softly. That's everything we were trying to accomplish. Have you heard from Richard? Sarah asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. He took a position at Broadmoor Academy, traditional, elite, exactly his speed. James's expression turned thoughtful. He'll probably be successful there. Some places want the culture he provides. We're just not one of them anymore. And you, Sarah asked, any regrets about revealing yourself, about the changes, about, she gestured vaguely, all of this? James was quiet for a long moment, his gray eyes distant. My mother spent 15 years trying to reform this place from inside the system. She fought battles with board members and wealthy donors. She compromised when she needed to and held firm when she could. But I think, in the end, she felt like she'd only managed incremental change. He looked at Sarah directly. 6 months of working with you, of watching you refuse to compromise on human dignity, of seeing students and staff believe their voices matter, that's more than incremental. That's revolutionary. So no regrets. Sarah's phone buzzed. Email notification from Dr. Lin, the school counselor. Student in crisis. Sophomore, first-generation college hopeful, family emergency threatening to pull him out of school. Can you help? Duty calls, Sarah said, already standing. Go, James collected their coffee cups. Save the world, Dr. Mitchell. One student at a time, Sarah replied, but she was smiling. The sophomore was named David Park. His father had lost his job, family facing eviction, David preparing to drop out to work full-time and help with bills. Sarah spent 2 hours with him in her office, talking about options. She connected his family with community resources, found him emergency scholarship funding, arranged for him to work part-time in the library for additional income. Why are you helping me? David asked finally, his voice thick with emotion. I'm nobody. My family doesn't donate. We're basically charity cases here. You're not nobody, Sarah saw. Id firmly. You're a student with a 3.8 GPA, a gift for mathematics, and dreams of becoming an engineer. You matter because you exist, not because of what your family can afford. David left her office with shoulders straightened, hope restored. Sarah watched him go, then turned to find Rebecca leaning in her doorway. I heard about the Park family situation, Rebecca said. That was good work. It was basic human decency, which used to be revolutionary here. Funny how that works. Rebecca came in, closed the door behind her. Sarah, I wanted to tell you something. I'm retiring at the end of this school year. What? Why? I'm 63. I've taught English to entitled teenagers for 37 years. I'm tired. Rebecca's smile was gentle. But also, I'm leaving because I know this place is in good hands now. The work you and James are doing, that's the Westbridge I wanted to be part of when I started teaching. That's the school Elizabeth Davidson imagined. It took you 6 months to build what I couldn't build in 3 decades. That's not fair to yourself, Sarah protested. You stayed, you witnessed, you created safe spaces in your classroom even when the institution failed at creating them everywhere else. That matters, Rebecca. Rebecca's eyes went shiny. Thank you for saying that. But honestly, watching you refuse to accept the way things were, watching you demand better, that taught me something. I'd become complicit through exhaustion. You reminded me that exhaustion isn't an excuse. They talked for another hour, about teaching and reform and the cost of institutional change. When Rebecca left, Sarah sat in her office feeling the weight of legacy. People like Rebecca and Elizabeth Davidson who tried to hold the line, and people like James and herself trying to push that line forward. The board meeting that evening felt less like a trial and more like a celebration. Catherine Brennan presented her motion to make Sarah's position permanent, increase her budget, and expand her department. The vote was unanimous. Gerald Ashworth, the elderly board chairman, spoke at the end. 6 months ago, I wasn't sure about this experiment. I worried we were sacrificing stability for idealism, but I've watched this school transform. Students who felt unsafe now feel protected. Faculty who felt silenced now feel heard. Staff who felt invisible now feel valued. That's not idealism, that's just decency, basic human decency. Funny how revolutionary that can be. After the meeting, James found Sarah standing alone in the parking lot, looking up at Westbridge Academy's illuminated facade against the darkening sky. "Penny, for your thoughts," he asked. "Just thinking about how different this place looks now. Same building, same stone, same windows, but it feels different, lighter somehow." "Because the weight of ignored suffering has been lifted," James said quietly. "My mother used to say buildings hold memories, not just in their walls, but in the way people move through them, whether they walk with heads high or shoulders curved, whether they speak freely or learn to be silent." She was right. Sarah turned to look at him. "James, can I ask you something?" "Always." "Why did you wait so long? You said you'd been watching for 2 years before you approached me. Why not intervene sooner?" James's expression turned pained. "Cowardice, mostly. I told myself I was gathering evidence, waiting for the perfect moment, but honestly, I was afraid, of failure, of responsibility, of proving I wasn't the leader my mother believed I could be." He paused. "Then I watched you, this woman who'd lost everything, defend Carlos Mendez with nothing but moral clarity and courage. And I realized my fear was just privilege in disguise. I could afford to wait. People like you and Carlos couldn't." "We're all just doing the best we can," Sarah said softly. "No, some people do better than their best. You're one of them," James smiled. "Come on, I want to show you something." He led her back inside, through the quiet hallways, past classrooms dark for the evening. They climbed stairs to the third floor, to a section Sarah had rarely visited. James stopped in front of a locked door with a brass nameplate, Elizabeth Davidson Memorial Archive. "I haven't opened this room since my mother died," James said, producing a key. "Couldn't bear to, but I think it's time." Inside, the air smelled like old paper and preserved memories. Shelves lined with books, file cabinets, photographs covering one entire wall. But James led Sarah to a specific photo, black and white, slightly faded. A young woman, perhaps 30, standing in front of Westbridge Academy's entrance. She wore simple clothes, held a briefcase, and smiled at the camera with fierce determination. "My mother," James said. "First day as Westbridge's new institutional equity officer. Position my grandfather created specifically for her, trying to prove he supported her work even though he'd spent years opposing it." Sarah studied the photograph. Elizabeth Davidson's face held the same quality Sarah recognized in her own mirror lately, someone who'd survived dismissal and emerged determined to matter. "She looks," Sarah searched for the right word. "Unbreakable," James finished. "That's what I see too, like she'd already weathered the worst and nothing left could diminish her." He touched the frame gently. "She'd be proud of what you're building here, prouder than she'd be of me, honestly." "That's not true." "Isn't it? I hid for 2 years while you cleaned toilets with a medical degree and never lost your dignity. I had power and was afraid to use it. You had nothing and changed everything anyway." "James," Sarah turned to face him fully. "You gave me the platform. You revealed yourself, risked your privacy, stood up to Richard when you could have stayed hidden. That took courage too." "Or maybe," James said quietly, "you inspired courage I didn't know I had." The air between them shifted, something unspoken becoming almost tangible. Sarah had felt it before, in quiet moments over coffee, in shared glances during difficult meetings. something more than alliance, deeper than friendship. But James stepped back, creating distance, and the moment dissolved. "I should go," he said. "Let you process the evening, but Sarah, thank you for 6 months of showing this place what it could be, for making my mother's dream real." After he left, Sarah stood alone in the archive room, surrounded by Elizabeth Davidson's legacy. She found herself thinking about the past year, the destruction and rebuilding, the humiliation and vindication, the invisible months and the visible future. Her phone buzzed, text from Carlos. "Maria wants you to come to dinner this Sunday. She's making her abuela's recipe. Please say yes. We owe you everything." Sarah smiled, typing back acceptance. Another text, this one from Dr. Lin. "David Park's father got a new job, better than the old one. David's staying at Westbridge. Miracles happen when people care. Thank you for caring." Sarah left the archive room, locking it behind her, carrying Elizabeth Davidson's fierce determination like a torch passed between generations. 3 months later, the spring semester brought transformation visible even from outside Westbridge's gates. The student body had shifted, fewer entitled legacies, more scholarship recipients, a deliberate diversification that made hallways sound different, feel different. The casual cruelty that had once been ambient noise had diminished to isolated incidents that were swiftly addressed rather than tolerated. Sarah's department had expanded. She now had 2 assistant directors, one focused on student support, another on faculty relations. Together, they'd implemented programs that were attracting national attention: peer mediation training, restorative justice circles, a mentorship program pairing students across economic backgrounds. But the most significant change wasn't visible in programs or policies. It was visible in faces. Carlos walked the hallways with shoulders straight, greeting students who'd learned his name and responded with respect. Elena Rodriguez had started a LGBTQ+ alliance that met weekly in Sarah's conference room. David Park was applying to MIT with recommendation letters from faculty who'd watched him work 3 jobs while maintaining honors grades. And Sarah, Dr. Sarah Mitchell, had stopped flinching when people said her name with recognition rather than dismissal. On a Tuesday morning in late April, Sarah arrived at her office to find an envelope on her desk. Inside, a formal letter from Johns Hopkins Medical School. "Dear Dr. Mitchell, we followed your work at Westbridge Academy with great interest. Your innovative approach to institutional culture reform represents exactly the kind of systemic thinking healthcare desperately needs. We'd like to offer you a position as adjunct faculty in our medical ethics and healthcare policy program, teaching future doctors about institutional accountability, power dynamics in medical settings, and ethical leadership." Sarah read the letter 3 times, her coffee growing cold beside her. They wanted her back, not in the role she'd lost, but in a role that recognized the journey she'd taken, teaching about institutional failure from lived experience, preparing future doctors to recognize and resist the patterns that had nearly destroyed her. "Good news," James's voice from the doorway. Sarah looked up. He held 2 coffees, their Tuesday ritual unchanged despite everything else that had evolved. "Hopkins wants me to teach medical ethics," she said, handing him the letter. James read it carefully, his expression unreadable. When he finished, he set it down gently. "That's incredible, Sarah, truly. You'd be phenomenal at it." "But—" "No but, just, we'd miss you here, I'd miss you." He said it simply, without performance or manipulation, just truth. Sarah felt something tight release in her chest. "James, I need to tell you something, and I need you to listen without interrupting or trying to solve it." "Okay." 9 months ago, I was cleaning these floors and believing my life was over, believing I'd never matter again, never contribute anything meaningful, never be more than invisible labor in spaces that didn't see me. Sarah's voice steadied. "Then you saw me, not just physically, but truly. You saw my worth when I'd forgotten how to see it myself. You gave me a platform and trusted me with power I wasn't sure I deserved." James started to speak, but Sarah held up a hand. "Let me finish. You've been extraordinary, your courage, your vision, your willingness to risk everything for what's right. And somewhere in these months of fighting together, building together, transforming this place together," she paused, gathering courage, "I fell in love with you." The words hung in the air like smoke, impossible to call back. James's expression cycled through surprise, confusion, and something else Sarah couldn't quite read. Sarah, I don't need you to feel the same way, she continued quickly. And I won't let it make things awkward. I just needed to say it out loud before I decide about Hopkins. Because if I stay here, I need to know it's for the work, not because I'm secretly hoping for something that isn't going to happen. And if I leave, I need to know I'm leaving honestly, not running from uncomfortable feelings. James set down his coffee carefully, moved closer. Can I speak now? Please. I've been in love with you since you defended Carlos in that hallway, James said, his voice low and intense. Since you stood up to entitled bullies with nothing but moral clarity. Since you chose dignity over bitterness every single day despite having every reason to be bitter. Since you showed me what courage actually looks like. Sarah's breath caught. But James continued, you were vulnerable, you just survived professional assassination. You were rebuilding. The last thing you needed was someone with institutional power over you making romantic overtures. It would have been Harrison all over again, powerful man, vulnerable woman, impossible power dynamics. So you said nothing. I said nothing and tried to be what you actually needed, an ally, a supporter, someone who believed in your worth without demanding anything in return. James's gray eyes held hers. But Sarah, if you're telling me you feel the same way, if you're saying the feelings are mutual and not coerced by gratitude or power dynamics. They're not, Sarah said firmly. James, you gave me a platform, but I built what stands on it. You offered opportunity, but I did the work. We're colleagues, partners in this mission. The power dynamics aren't what you think they are. Then I'm saying I love you, James said simply. I love your courage and your compassion in equal measure. I love that you see people, truly see them, in a world that teaches invisibility. I love that you chose to fight for this place even when you could have run back to medicine. I love. Sarah kissed him, cutting off the litany. It was gentle and fierce simultaneously, months of unspoken feelings condensed into a single moment of perfect clarity. When they pulled apart, James was smiling, truly smiling, the kind that transformed his usually serious face into something radiant. So, he said, what about Hopkins? Sarah laughed, the sound bright and free. I think I can do both. Teach 1 semester per year, maintain my work here the rest of the time. Westbridge still needs me. You still need me. And maybe I finally believe I'm allowed to want multiple things simultaneously without apologizing for any of them. You're allowed, James said softly. You're allowed to want everything. 6 months later, 1-year anniversary. The anniversary celebration was held in Westbridge's main auditorium, packed with students, faculty, staff, and board members. Sarah stood backstage, wearing a dress Rebecca had helped her choose, elegant but not apologetic, powerful but not aggressive, the perfect armor for public vulnerability. Nervous, Rebecca asked from beside her. Terrified. Good, you should be, but you're also ready. Rebecca squeezed her hand. Go show them what a year of believing in human dignity accomplishes. Sarah walked onto the stage to genuine applause, not polite obligation, but real appreciation. She looked out at the audience and saw faces that told the story better than words could. Carlos sitting in the front row with Maria, both dressed in their finest, beaming with pride. Elena Rodriguez and her girlfriend holding hands openly, no longer afraid. David Park in the second row, wearing an MIT acceptance t-shirt. Dr. Lynn dabbing at tears before Sarah had even spoken. And James, standing at the side of the auditorium, his expression carrying love and respect in equal measure. Sarah approached the microphone and let the silence. Settle before speaking. A year ago, she said, I was pushing a cleaning cart through these hallways, invisible to most of you. I'd lost my medical career, my reputation, my sense of purpose. I took a job as a janitor because it was honest work that paid bills while I rebuilt from ruins. She paused, letting people sit with that image, the woman they saw now compared to the woman she'd been. What I didn't know then was that invisibility can be a gift, because when people don't see you, they reveal who they truly are. They show you how they treat those they consider beneath them. They demonstrate whether their values are performance or practice. Sarah looked directly at the students, some who'd been cruel to her and learned accountability, others who'd been kind all along and now felt validated. I watched you, she said. All of you, I saw kindness and cruelty. I witnessed courage and cowardice. I observed which of you held doors for janitors and which walked past like we were furniture. I documented who defended vulnerable classmates and who participated in their humiliation. The auditorium was absolutely silent. And then I stopped being invisible. I became Director of Student Welfare and Institutional Culture, a position created specifically to ensure that how we treat each other matters as much as how we perform academically, to guarantee that dignity isn't determined by economic status or family legacy. Sarah pulled out notes she'd prepared but found she didn't need them. The words came from somewhere deeper than paper. This year, we've accomplished measurable things. 372 complaints investigated and resolved, 47 students held accountable for harassment or discrimination, 23 new scholarships funded for students from underrepresented backgrounds, satisfaction scores increased across all demographics, faculty retention at an all-time high. She set the notes down. But numbers don't tell the real story. The real story is in the faces I see before me. Students who feel safe enough to be themselves, staff who walk these halls with dignity, faculty who know their concerns will be heard rather than dismissed, a community learning that character matters more than wealth, that kindness is strength rather than weakness, that accountability is love rather than punishment. Sarah's voice broke slightly, emotion rising despite her attempts at control. I came to Westbridge broken, believing I had nothing left to offer. But this place, this community, taught me that worth isn't something we lose when powerful people try to take it. It's something inherent, unchangeable, sacred. You can only lose your worth if you forget to see it in yourself and others. She looked at Carlos, at Alina, at David, at all the faces representing transformation. Thank you for letting me be part of this change. Thank you for doing the uncomfortable work of becoming better. Thank you for proving that institutions can evolve when people care more about justice than comfort. Sarah smiled through tears. And thank you for seeing me, truly seeing me, when I most needed to remember that I existed beyond the work I did or the position I held. The applause started slowly, then built to something thunderous. People stood, not perfunctory obligation, but genuine recognition. Sarah saw students crying, faculty cheering, staff members who'd survived their own invisible years looking at her like she'd spoken their stories too. After the ceremony, Sarah stood in the reception area accepting congratulations and thanks in equal measure. But the moment that mattered most came when a freshman approached her. A scholarship student named Maya Chen, first-generation American, brilliant mathematician who'd faced discrimination Sarah had personally addressed. Dr. Mitchell, Maya said shyly, I just wanted to say, I'm going to be what you are someday. I'm going to take my own pain and use it to protect other people. Because you showed me that's possible. That surviving doesn't mean just getting through it. It means building something from what tried to break you. Sarah hugged this girl she barely knew, this young woman carrying dreams too big for one person but perfect for a lifetime. You're going to be extraordinary, Maya, not because of what you survive, but because of what you choose to build after. Later, as the reception wound down and cleanup began, Sarah found herself alone in the auditorium with James. The lights were being turned off section by section, creating pockets of shadow and illumination. Quite a speech, James said, coming to stand beside her. Quite a year, Sarah replied. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the space empty, thinking about how much had changed and how much work remained. I've been thinking, James said finally, about legacy and responsibility and what my mother would want me to do with this place. And I think it's time I stepped out of the shadows completely. Announced myself publicly, took active role in leadership rather than operating through lawyers and proxies. He looked at Sarah. But I can't do it alone. I need a partner, someone who understands the work, shares the vision, can challenge me when power makes me blind. Sarah's heart rate accelerated. Are you asking? If you'd consider becoming Associate Director of Westbridge Academy, James finished. Full operational partnership, equal voice in decision-making, building on this year's foundation to create something sustainable, something that outlasts us both. That's a hell of an offer. You've earned a hell of an offer, James smiled. But I understand if Hopkins is calling louder, if you need to return to medicine fully, if Westbridge was just a chapter rather than the whole story. Sarah thought about the year behind her, the humiliation and vindication, the invisibility and recognition, the breaking and rebuilding. She thought about Hopkins's offer to teach medical ethics from lived experience. She thought about Carlos and Alina and David and Maya and all the faces representing transformation she'd been privileged to witness. I think, she said slowly, I spent years believing my story was supposed to follow one path: medical school, residency, prestigious hospital position, climbing traditional ladders of success. Then Harrison burned that path down, and I thought my story was over. But, but maybe the path I was following wasn't actually my story. Maybe it was just the prologue. Sarah turned to face James fully. Maybe the real story starts here, building institutions that protect vulnerable people, teaching students that character matters more than credentials, creating spaces where everyone is seen rather than just those with power. Is that a yes? James asked, hope naked on his face. That's a yes to partnership at Westbridge, yes to teaching at Hopkins part-time, yes to building something bigger than either of us individually. Sarah paused. And yes to us, whatever us becomes when we're not hiding behind professional distance and fear of power dynamics. James pulled her close, kissing her forehead gently. My mother used to say the best legacy is the one you build with people who challenge you to be better than you'd be alone. She sounds remarkably wise. She was, you would have liked each other. James's voice carried old grief and new hope simultaneously. She believed institutions are just people making daily choices about whether to see each other truly, whether to value dignity over convenience, whether to build community or simply occupy shared space. Then let's build community, Sarah said firmly. Let's make Westbridge what she dreamed it could be. Let's prove that transformation is possible when people care more about each other than about maintaining comfortable hierarchies. They left the auditorium together, turning off the last lights, locking doors on a space that would open again tomorrow, filled with students learning that their worth wasn't determined by their bank accounts or family names. Outside, the autumn evening was crisp and clear, stars visible despite the suburban light pollution. Sarah breathed deeply, tasting possibility and promise in the cold air. You know what's funny? She said as they walked toward their cars. What? A year ago, I parked in the far lot with the other staff, hoping no one would notice my 10-year-old sedan. Now I park in the faculty lot and don't apologize for what I drive or where I came from or what I survived to get here. Growth looks good on you, James said softly. Growth looks good on all of us, Sarah corrected. Even institutions, even schools that were built on exclusion and had to learn inclusion, even people who were taught that power means dominance and had to relearn it as responsibility. Her phone buzzed, text from Rebecca. Watched your speech from the back row, cried like a baby. Elizabeth Davidson would be so damn proud. Hell, I'm so damn proud. You're changing the world, Sarah Mitchell. One dignified moment at a time. Sarah showed James the message. He smiled, eyes going shiny. She's right, you know. My mother would have loved you, not just for what you've accomplished, but for how you accomplished it, with grace and grit in equal measure, with compassion that never compromised on accountability, with the kind of moral clarity that comes from surviving injustice without becoming bitter. I did become bitter, Sarah admitted. For months, I was so angry I could barely function. At Harrison, at the hospital, at myself for not being more careful, more strategic, more human, James interrupted gently. Sarah, you were human. You made the revolutionary choice to exist as a full person rather than as a convenience for powerful men. That's not a failure, that's courage. Sarah leaned against her car, looking back at Westbridge Academy's illuminated facade. The building held different memories now, not just the ones of invisible mornings pushing a squeaky cart, but also moments of transformation, justice, dignity restored. I want to do one thing, she said suddenly, before we leave. She led James back inside, through quiet hallways, to the custodial closet where her cart still sat. She'd kept it, refusing to let anyone throw it away. Sarah touched the front left wheel, the one that had always squeaked, announcing her presence in empty spaces. I used to hate this sound, she said. This squeak that told everyone a janitor was coming, giving them time to look away, to pretend I didn't exist. And now I think it was teaching me something. That making noise, being unavoidably present even when people want you to be invisible, that's a form of resistance. That squeak said, I'm here, I exist. You can look away, but I'm still taking up space. Sarah pushed the cart gently, letting the familiar sound echo through the hallway one more time. Then she locked the closet and they left together. 2 years later, epilogue. Dr. Sarah Mitchell stood at the podium of the National Conference on Educational Equity, looking out at hundreds of educators, administrators, and reformers who'd gathered to learn about Westbridge Academy's transformation. "The question I'm asked most frequently," Sarah said into the microphone, "is how do you change institutional culture? People want a formula, a step-by-step process, a guaranteed method for transforming places that have normalized cruelty." She paused, letting the audience lean forward with anticipation. "The answer is simpler and harder than anyone wants to hear. You change culture by changing yourself first. By refusing to accept that this is how we've always done things is sufficient justification for doing harm. By seeing people, truly seeing them, regardless of their position or power. By recognizing that every interaction is a choice between dismissal and dignity." Sarah clicked to the next slide, a photograph of her pushing a cleaning cart through Westbridge's hallways, taken secretly by a student 2 years ago. "This is me 3 years ago, invisible, dismissed, carrying a medical degree while emptying trash bins because a powerful man decided my rejection was worth destroying my career over." She let them sit with the image. "And this is also me, broken, angry, believing my story was over." Next slide, Sarah at her office desk, surrounded by students seeking help, Carlos smiling beside her, Elena leading an alliance meeting. "This is me now, Director of Student Welfare and Institutional Culture, Associate Director of Westbridge Academy, Adjunct Faculty at Johns Hopkins teaching medical ethics, published author of Institutional Dignity, Reforming School Culture from Within, guest speaker at conferences like this one." She looked directly at the audience. "But here's what matters. Neither version of me is more valuable than the other. The woman pushing that cart was worthy of respect. The woman standing before you is worthy of respect. Worth doesn't change with position, only visibility does." The auditorium was absolutely silent. The mistake we make in institutional reform is believing we need to fix broken people. We don't. We need to fix broken systems that teach people their worth is conditional on power. We need to dismantle hierarchies that value status over character. We need to build communities where janitors and directors, students and staff all recognize each other as fully human. Sarah spoke for 45 minutes, detailing Westbridge's transformation, the policies implemented, the resistance overcome, the measurable outcomes achieved. But she kept returning to the central thesis. Institutions change when individuals refuse to participate in normalized cruelty. During the Q&A session, a young teacher raised her hand. "Dr. Mitchell, what do you say to people who claim your story is exceptional, that you only succeeded because you had unique qualifications and a sympathetic owner willing to support you? How do we create change when we don't have those advantages?" Sarah smiled. "You're right that I had advantages, education, eventual support from James Westbrook, resources others don't have. But you know what I also had? 8 months of cleaning toilets while carrying shame I didn't deserve. Months of being invisible, dismissed, treated as less than by people who never bothered to see me." She paused. "Change doesn't require exceptional qualifications. It requires exceptional courage. The courage to name injustice when silence is easier. The courage to defend vulnerable people when apathy is safer. The courage to build something better even when maintaining status quo is more comfortable." The teacher nodded, eyes bright with determination. After the conference, Sarah found James waiting in the hotel lobby. They'd married quietly 6 months ago, a small ceremony with Carlos as best man, Rebecca crying in the front row, Elena reading a poem about dignity and intertwined. "How did it go?" James asked, pulling her into an embrace. "I think we inspired some people, scared others, made everyone uncomfortable in productive ways." Sarah laughed. "Standard operating procedure." They walked together through the conference hotel, past groups of educators debating policies and strategies. Sarah caught fragments of conversation, Westbridge model, dignity-centered approach, systematic accountability, and felt something warm expand in her chest. 3 years ago, she'd been erased by institutional power. Now, she was teaching others how to dismantle the structures that enabled that erasure. "Tired?" James asked as they reached their room. "Exhausted, but good exhausted." Sarah kicked off her heels, sighing with relief, the kind that comes from meaningful work rather than meaningless survival. Her phone rang, unknown number. "Dr. Mitchell, this is Philip Harrison." Sarah's blood went cold. She hadn't heard his voice in 3 years, had successfully avoided every attempt he'd made to contact her. "Why are you calling me?" she managed. "Because I need you to know something." Harrison's voice was different, smaller, stripped of the confidence she remembered. "I lost everything. My license, my reputation, my family. I'm working as a medical consultant now, reviewing cases from home, anonymous work that doesn't require me to interact with people who know what I did." Sarah said nothing, waiting. "I'm not calling for forgiveness," Harrison continued. "I don't deserve that. I'm calling to say, you were right to reject me, to fight back, to refuse to disappear quietly. I was wrong morally, ethically, in every way that matters, and I'm sorry, not because it changes anything, but because you deserve to hear it." Silence stretched between them, years of damage condensed into a phone call neither had wanted. "Thank you for saying that," Sarah said finally. "It doesn't undo the harm, but it acknowledges truth. That's something." "Are you happy?" Harrison asked. "I've followed your career, the work at Westbridge, the speaking, the book. Are you happy?" Sarah looked at James, at the hotel room in a city where she'd just inspired hundreds of educators, at the life she'd built from ruins. "Yes," she said simply, "I'm happy, not despite what you did to me, but because I chose to build something meaningful from it. You tried to erase me. Instead, you taught me that I'm unerasable. That was probably the most valuable lesson I've ever learned." She hung up before he could respond. James pulled her close. "You okay?" "More than okay." Sarah breathed deeply, releasing years of carried tension. "That was closure, not because he apologized, but because I realized his opinion, his regret, his acknowledgement, his anything doesn't matter to my healing. I healed without him. I rebuilt without his permission. I became exactly who I was meant to be despite his best efforts to destroy me." "That's power," James said softly. "Real power. The kind that can't be taken away because it comes from within rather than being granted by institutions or individuals." They stood together at the hotel window, looking out at the city lights, thinking about the past and future simultaneously. "What happens next?" James asked. "For us, for Westbridge, for this work we're building." "We keep going," Sarah said. "We train more educators, we implement the model in more schools, we write another book, we build networks of people who believe dignity isn't optional." She paused. "And maybe we start thinking about having kids someday, teaching the next generation that institutions serve people, not the other way around." James smiled. "That's quite an agenda." "We're quite a team." They were a janitor and an owner, a survivor and an heir, two people who'd learned that transformation starts with refusing to accept that harm is inevitable, that dignity is negotiable, that some people matter less than others. 5 years later, final scene. Sarah stood in Westbridge Academy's entrance hall, watching parents drop off their children for the first day of school. The building looked different now, more scholarship students, more diversity in every visible way, an ambient energy that felt welcoming rather than exclusive. But the biggest change was invisible to visitors, a culture where people saw each other truly, where janitors and students exchanged greetings, where faculty defended staff from disrespect, where vulnerability was honored rather than exploited. Carlos approached, moving slower now. He'd retired last year but still volunteered weekly, mentoring young custodial staff, sharing stories about the before times and the transformation after. "Big day," Carlos said, standing beside Sarah. "First day of school always feels like possibility, doesn't it?" "It does," Sarah smiled at this man who taught her about dignity through his quiet endurance. "Maria called yesterday. She's been promoted to head nurse at Metropolitan Gen. Iral full circle. She says she models her leadership after you," Carlos said, his voice thick with emotion. "Making sure everyone, from surgeons to janitors, feels valued, refusing to tolerate hierarchies that devalue people based on position." "She's going to change that hospital," Sarah predicted, "one dignified interaction at a time." A little girl ran past them, perhaps 5 years old, all energy and excitement. She stopped, turned around, and looked up at Sarah with huge brown eyes. "Are you Dr. Mitchell?" the girl asked. "I am. My mama says you're the reason kids are nice here now, that you made being mean have consequences." The girl said it seriously, like reporting important facts. "She says you used to clean bathrooms and now you run the whole school, and that means I can be anything I want when I grow up." Sarah crouched down to the girl's level. "What's your name?" Sophia. Well, Sophia, your mama is right about one thing. You can absolutely be anything you want. But not because I cleaned bathrooms and then didn't. Because you're smart and capable and worthy exactly as you are right now. The work you do doesn't determine your worth. Your character does. Sophia nodded solemnly, processing this wisdom. Then she hugged Sarah quickly, spontaneous child affection that asked no permission, and ran off to join her classmates. Carlos laughed softly. 5 years ago, that interaction would have been impossible. Students didn't hug staff, didn't even see staff as human beings worth hugging. 5 years ago, I wouldn't have believed this was possible, Sarah admitted. I was so broken, so convinced my life was over, and now. She gestured around them, at the hallways filled with students who'd learned kindness, at the staff who moved with dignity, at the transformed institution that proved change was possible when people cared enough to fight for it. James appeared then, carrying their 18-month-old daughter, Grace. Named after the concept Sarah and James had decided mattered most: unearned mercy, freely given, transformative. Someone woke up from her nap and demanded to see Mama, James said, handing Grace over. Sarah cuddled their daughter close, breathing in the baby scent of possibility and future. Grace grabbed Sarah's face with both hands, demanding attention with the absoluteness only toddlers possess. "Mama work," Grace said seriously. It was her newest phrase, recognizing that Sarah disappeared some days to do mysterious adult things. "Mama works," Sarah confirmed. "Making schools kind places, teaching people to see each other, building community where everyone matters." Grace nodded like she understood completely, then demanded to be put down so she could chase the trailing edge of a student's backpack. "Do you ever regret it?" James asked quietly, watching Grace toddle determinedly after her target. "Giving up medicine, choosing this path instead?" Sarah thought about the question, truly considered it rather than offering automatic reassurance. She thought about emergency rooms and surgical theaters, about the life she'd planned before Harrison destroyed it. She thought about alternate timelines where she'd returned to Metropolitan General, reclaimed her residency, climbed traditional ladders of medical success. "No," she said finally, "I don't regret it. Medicine teaches you to heal individuals. This work teaches you to heal systems. Both matter, but I think I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be." She looked at James, at Grace, at Carlos and the transformed hallways, and all the visible evidence of impossible change. "I used to think success meant individual achievement," Sarah continued. "Prestigious positions, impressive titles, professional recognition, but real success is building something that outlasts you, creating systems that protect people after you're gone, teaching the next generation that dignity isn't optional and kindness isn't weakness." "Elizabeth would be proud," James said softly, "of all of this, of you. I wish I could have met her." "She's here," James said, gesturing around them. "In every policy you've written, every student you've protected, every person who walks these halls knowing they matter. That's her legacy continued through your work. That's immortality, not in buildings or endowments, but in transformed culture." Sarah's phone buzzed. Email from Maya Chen, the freshman who'd promised to build her own protection from survived pain. Maya was in college now, studying social work, planning to create institutional reform programs. "Dr. Mitchell, my thesis proposal was accepted. I'm studying how trauma survivors build protective systems for others, using Westbridge as primary case study. Can we schedule an interview? You're my hero. You taught me that surviving is just the beginning, building is the real work." Sarah showed James the message, her eyes bright with tears that came easier now, not from pain, but from recognition of meaning accumulated. "Another generati." "On," James said. "Another person choosing to transform their pain into protection for others." "That's the real legacy," Sarah agreed. "Not the policies we wrote or the positions we created, the people we inspired to believe change is possible." Rebecca appeared then, walking slower now. Retirement suited her, but she still visited weekly, unable to fully leave the place she'd spent decades trying to reform from within. "Sarah, James, there's someone I want you to meet." Rebecca gestured to a young woman beside her, mid-20s, wearing simple clothes and carrying a folder thick with purpose. "This is Dr. Amanda Torres. She just finished her residency in pediatrics, and she has a story that sounds familiar." Amanda stepped forward, her expression carrying the weight Sarah recognized intimately. someone who'd survived professional assassination and emerged determined to matter differently. Dr. Mitchell, Amanda said, her voice steady despite obvious nerves. I was forced out of my residency program 8 months ago, false accusations from a superior I'd rejected, my reputation destroyed, my career apparently over. She paused. Then I read your book, and I realized my story doesn't end with erasure, it transforms into something else. Sarah's heart squeezed tight with recognition and grief and hope intertwined. What do you need? She asked simply. A job, a chance, a place where I can rebuild while using my medical training to help students who need healthcare advocacy but can't navigate the system alone. Amanda pulled documents from her folder. I've drafted a proposal for a school-based health equity program, medical care coordination for underserved students, mental health support that addresses trauma from poverty and discrimination, a bridge between education and healthcare. Sarah took the proposal, skimming pages that demonstrated exactly the kind of systematic thinking institutions needed but rarely possessed. Amanda had used her exile to develop something transformative, just as Sarah had done, just as Maya was doing, just as countless survivors would continue doing when given platforms instead of erasure. You're hired, Sarah said without consulting anyone, using the authority she'd earned over 5 years of proven judgment. We'll create the position, fund it from the budget I've been building for exactly these moments, start in 2 weeks. Amanda's professional composure cracked. She pressed her hands to her mouth, tears streaming down her face, body shaking with relief so profound it looked like pain. Thank you, she whispered. Thank you for seeing me. Thank you for believing me. Thank you for recognizing that you're not broken, Sarah interrupted gently. Just broken open, and that makes you perfect for this work. Rebecca wrapped Amanda in a hug, this young doctor and this retired teacher finding solidarity across generations and professions. James stood beside Sarah, his hand finding hers, squeezing gently. It keeps multiplying, he said softly. Every person you save saves others. Every platform you build becomes a launching point for new platforms. Every act of dignity becomes a template for more dignity. That's how movements work, Sarah replied. Not through individual heroes, but through networks of people who refuse to accept that harm is inevitable, who choose to build protective systems from their own survived pain. Grace toddled back, demanding to be picked up with the urgency of someone who'd been separated from their parent for an eternity, approximately 3 minutes. Sarah lifted her daughter, settling the warm weight against her hip, thinking about the future this child would inherit. A future where institutions protected people rather than exploiting them, where power meant responsibility rather than immunity, where survivors built systems ensuring others wouldn't survive alone. What are you thinking? James asked. That 5 years ago I thought my story was ending, Sarah said slowly. I thought Harrison had written my final chapter, professional ruin, personal humiliation, forced invisibility. I thought that's how my story concluded. She looked at Amanda, at Rebecca, at Carlos, at the transformed hallways and all the visible evidence of impossible change. But it wasn't an ending. It was an inciting incident, the moment that forced me to become someone different, not better than who I was, but more aligned with who I'd always meant to be. Sarah's voice strengthened. And now that I understand that pattern, I can help others recognize it, that their supposed endings are actually beginnings, that exile can become mission, that erasure can become clarity. Dr. Mitchell, a student approached, senior scholarship recipient, the first in his family to attend college. I'm writing my college essay about institutional change, about how Westbridge transformed. Could I interview you? Of course, Sarah shifted Grace to her other hip, but interview Mr. Mendez too, and Dr. Lin and Ms. Hayes. My part is just one thread in a much larger tapestry. The student nodded eagerly, already pulling out a recording device. Actually, Sarah added, interview the students too, the ones who have been here long enough to remember the before times. Ask them what changed and why it matters. Let them tell the story, not just administrators and reformers, but the people most impacted by the culture shift. After the student left, Carlos smiled at Sarah with grandfatherly affection. You never take credit, he observed, always spreading it around, making sure everyone's voice is included. Because it's not about me, Sarah said simply. It was never about me, I was just the catalyst, the person who happened to be in the right place with the right combination of desperation and determination. But the transformation, that's collective. That's everyone choosing daily to see each other truly. Rebecca checked her watch. I should go. Book club starts in an hour and you know how Martha gets if anyone's late. She hugged Sarah tight. I'm proud of you, of all of this, of what you've built from ruins. After Rebecca left, after Carlos departed to mentor new custodial staff, after Amanda went to fill out hiring paperwork, Sarah stood in the entrance hall with James and Grace, watching the first day of school unfold around them. Students laughed in hallways that had once echoed with casual cruelty. Teachers greeted custodial staff by name with respect that had once been unimaginable. Parents dropped off children in a building that now prioritized character over credentials, dignity over donations. Do you know what I'm most proud of? Sarah asked James. What? That squeaky cart is still in the custodial closet. We kept it deliberately, not as a relic or symbol, but as a reminder that the work of maintenance and cleaning is honorable, that the people who do that work deserve the same respect as people who do my work. That position doesn't determine worth. And we make sure every new student sees it during orientation, James added, along with your story, so they understand from day one that this place values people, not hierarchies. Grace squirmed, demanding to be set down. Sarah released her, watching their daughter toddle determinedly toward a group of students who immediately made space for her, speaking gently to the toddler who'd invaded their circle. She's going to grow up thinking this is normal, Sarah observed. Thinking institutions naturally protect people, that dignity is default rather than something fought for. Is that good or bad? James asked. Both, Sarah considered. Good because she'll expect better and demand better, bad because she might not understand how fragile it all is, how much work it takes to maintain cultures of dignity, how easily institutions slide back into old patterns when people stop paying attention. Then we'll teach her, James said firmly. Teach her that every generation has to choose whether to maintain protective systems or let them erode. That rights and dignity aren't permanent, they're choices made daily, collectively, with constant vigilance. Sarah's phone buzzed again. This time, an email from a school district in California. Dr. Mitchell, we've implemented the Westbridge model in 3 of our high schools. Results after 1 year, harassment incidents down 67%, student satisfaction up 52%, staff retention improved significantly. We're expanding to all 12 schools next year. Thank you for proving transformation is possible. You've changed countless lives beyond Westbridge. Sarah showed James, who read it and smiled. Countless lives, he repeated. That's what movements look like, not individual heroes but ripples expanding outward infinitely. They collected Grace, who protested leaving but eventually accepted the inevitability of departure. As they walked toward the parking lot, Sarah now in a faculty spot, no longer hiding her presence, Sarah took one last look at Westbridge Academy. The building stood unchanged architecturally. Same stone, same windows, same physical structure, but everything else had transformed, the energy, the culture, the soul of the place. You know what I realized, Sarah said as they buckled Grace into her car seat. I used to think institutional change was about policies and procedures, rules and consequences, systematic reform from the top down. And now I know it's about daily choices, thousands of small decisions to see people truly, to defend dignity in moments when silence is easier, to recognize that every interaction is an opportunity to build community or reinforce hierarchy. Sarah closed the car door gently. The policies matter, but they only work if people choose to embody them, if students decide to include rather than exclude, if faculty choose to intervene rather than ignore. If everyone daily selects dignity over convenience. James pulled her close, kissing her forehead with the tenderness of someone who'd watched her transform from invisible janitor to visible revolutionary. My mother once told me that her greatest fear wasn't that Westbridge would fail financially, it was that it would succeed materially while failing morally, that we'd produce graduates with impressive credentials and empty ethics. He gestured back toward the school. This, what you've built, ensures we succeed at both. We produce students who are academically excellent and ethically grounded. That's her dream realized. Our dream realized, Sarah corrected. You fought too, revealed yourself, risked your privacy, stood up to Richard when staying hidden was safer. You gave me the platform, but you also did the work. We did the work, James amended. Together, like we'll keep doing it until Grace is old enough to inherit the mission. And then she'll do the work with people we'll never meet, extending the network infinitely. They drove home together, Grace singing nonsense songs in her car seat, sun streaming through windows, the world feeling impossibly full of potential. Sarah thought about the girl she'd been 5 years ago, broken, invisible, believing her story had ended. That girl would be amazed by who she'd become, not because of the title or the recognition or the professional redemption, but because she'd learned the truth that had been hidden by her previous success. Worth isn't earned through achievement, it's inherent in existence, and institutions either honor that truth or violate it, but they never change it. Sarah Mitchell had cleaned toilets with a medical degree and emerged understanding that all work is honorable when done with dignity, that all people matter when institutions choose to see them. That transformation is always possible when someone refuses to accept that harm is inevitable. She'd been erased by institutional power and responded by teaching institutions to stop erasing. She'd been made invisible and emerged determined to see others clearly. She'd survived professional assassination and built systems, ensuring others wouldn't survive alone. That night, after Grace fell asleep in her crib, after dinner dishes were cleaned and tomorrow's lunches packed, Sarah stood in her home office staring at framed photographs telling the story of transformation. Her medical degree from Johns Hopkins, carefully preserved despite temptation to burn it during dark months. Her Letters to the Invisible, a book she'd written collecting testimonies from service workers about their experiences in institutions that taught them they didn't matter. It had become required reading in education programs across the country. A photograph of her and James on their wedding day, Carlos beaming beside them, Rebecca crying happy tears, Grace not yet born but already changing how they imagined the future. And finally, taped to the corner of her desk where she saw it every morning, a note from that first day 5 years ago, written in James's precise handwriting. Ms. Mitchell, the investigation into Dr. Harrison will conclude by month's end. You will be vindicated. In the meantime, your resilience is remarkable. Keep showing these students what dignity looks like. J.W. Sarah had been vindicated, but more importantly, she'd been transformed. Not fixed, she'd never been broken, but open to understanding that survival was just the foundation for building something bigger than personal redemption. She heard James approach behind her, felt his arms wrap around her waist, his chin resting on her shoulder as they both studied the photographs documenting 5 years of impossible change. Any regrets? He asked quietly. Sarah thought about the question, about Philip Harrison and Metropolitan General and the life she'd lost, about squeaky carts and invisible mornings and the woman who'd believed her story was over. Not a single one, she said firmly. Everything I lost, the prestige, the career trajectory, the comfortable future I'd planned, all of it was built on foundations I didn't understand, on systems that taught me credentials determined worth, that power meant immunity, that some people mattered less than others. She turned in James's arms to face him directly. Losing everything forced me to rebuild on better foundations, to understand that dignity is inherent, not earned, that institutions exist to serve people, not control them. That transformation is always possible when someone cares enough to fight for it. And now I wake up every day knowing my work matters, not because it's prestigious or impressive, but because it protects people who need protection, because it builds systems that honor dignity, because it teaches the next generation that they're responsible for the world they inherit, that maintaining justice takes effort, attention, daily choices to see each other truly. Sarah smiled, feeling peace she'd never experienced during her medical career. Harrison tried to erase me. Instead, he taught me I'm you. Narratable, that's probably the most valuable lesson I've ever learned. James kissed her softly, a gesture carrying 5 years of partnership, love, and shared mission. For the record, he said, you're my hero, not because of what you've accomplished, but because of how you accomplished it, with grace that never compromised on accountability, with compassion that never enabled cruelty, with the kind of moral clarity that comes from surviving injustice without becoming unjust. They stood together in Sarah's office, surrounded by evidence of transformation, thinking about the past and future simultaneously. Grace slept peacefully in the next room, inheriting a world slightly better than the one her mother had survived. Students across the country attended schools implementing the Westbridge model, learning that dignity wasn't optional. Survivors like Amanda Torres were building protective systems from their own survived pain, extending the network infinitely. And somewhere in empty hallways waiting for morning, a squeaky cart sat in a custodial closet, preserved deliberately as reminder that all work is honorable, all people are worthy, and institutions only matter when they protect the vulnerable rather than exploiting them. Sarah thought about the girl who'd pushed that cart 5 years ago, shoulders curved inward, making herself small in spaces that refused to see her. She wished she could tell that girl what was coming, the vindication, the transformation, the love, the work that would give her life meaning she'd never imagined. But mostly, she wished she could tell that girl the truth she'd learned through ruins and rebuilding. You are not broken, you are not finished, your story is not over. Sometimes what looks like an ending is actually an inciting incident. The moment that forces you to become who you've always meant to be, not better than you were, but more aligned with truth you'd been taught to ignore. That worth isn't earned through achievement. That dignity isn't determined by position. That institutions serve people, not the reverse. That survival is just the beginning. Building is the real work. And when you build systems that protect others from the pain you survived, when you transform your erasure into visibility for those still invisible, that's when your story stops being about you and becomes about everyone. That's when individual redemption becomes collective liberation. That's when you realize the most revolutionary act is simply refusing to accept that harm is inevitable. And choosing, every single day, to see people truly. Sarah turned off her office light, leaving the photographs to watch over empty space until morning. She checked on Grace one final time, their daughter sleeping with the absolute trust of someone who'd never known institutional cruelty, never learned to make herself small, never been taught that her worth was conditional. "Sleep well, baby girl," Sarah whispered. "You're inheriting a world where people fought for dignity, where survivors built protective systems, where institutions learned to serve rather than dominate. It's not perfect, it never will be, but it's better than it was, and someday you'll make it better still." She closed Grace's door gently and walked down the hallway toward her bedroom, where James waited with the patient love of someone who understood that transformation was daily work, not destination. Behind her, Westbridge Academy stood illuminated in the distance, visible through their bedroom window. The building that had witnessed her invisible months and her visible revolution. The institution that had learned, painfully and slowly, to honor the dignity it claimed to value. Tomorrow, Sarah would return to that building and continue the work. More complaints to investigate, more students to protect, more systems to reform, more people to teach that institutions only matter when they serve the vulnerable. But tonight, she allowed herself to feel the weight of accumulated meaning. 5 years of daily choices to see people truly. 5 years of refusing to accept that harm was inevitable. 5 years of transforming her survival into protection for others. That was legacy, not in buildings or endowments, but in transformed culture. Not in individual heroism, but in collective commitment to dignity. Not in endings or beginnings, but in the daily work of maintenance, keeping protective systems strong, teaching new generations why they matter, ensuring that squeaky carts still remind people that all work is honorable and all people are worthy. Sarah climbed into bed beside James, feeling his arms wrap around her in the darkness, holding her the way institutions should hold people. Firmly but gently, protectively but not restrictively, honoring her autonomy while offering sanctuary. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," James replied. "Thank you for teaching me what courage looks like, what transformation requires, what it means to refuse erasure." They fell asleep together, two people who'd learned that institutions change when individuals refuse to participate in normalized cruelty. That movements multiply through networks rather than heroes. That survival is just the foundation for building something bigger than personal redemption. And in the morning, they would wake and return to the work. Because the work was never finished. Because dignity required daily maintenance. Because institutions only stayed protective when people chose daily to keep them that way. But for now, Sarah Mitchell, former janitor, current director, survivor turned builder, woman who'd been erased and responded by teaching institutions to stop erasing, allowed herself to rest. knowing she'd transformed her ending into countless new beginnings, knowing she'd turned her invisibility into clarity for others, knowing that somewhere, someone was reading her story and realizing their own story wasn't over. That survival was just the beginning. Building was the real work. And when you chose dignity over convenience every single day, without exception or exhaustion, that's when you changed the world. One squeaky cart, one defended janitor, one protected student at a time. Until the revolution wasn't singular anymore. Until it became plural, collective, infinite. Until it became simply how things are done here. Because someone refused to accept any alternative. And that someone was her. Dr. Sarah Mitchell, who'd cleaned these halls and now protected them. Who'd been invisible and chose to see others. Who'd survived erasure and built systems ensuring no one survived alone. That was her story, not exceptional, just honest. Not heroic, just human. Not finished, just beginning again every morning. For the first time in years, she wasn't running from her past. She was building from it. And that made all the difference.